I want to speak to you from the heart for just a moment. After everything we have built together, story after story, night after night, I have created something new for us. A fresh channel called Mr. Geronimo, a fresh beginning, a place where every tale we love will live on. You have been the reason I keep telling these stories, and now I am asking for one small thing in return. Follow me to Mr. Geronimo. The link is waiting for you down in the comments section, pinned right at the top. One single tap, and you stay part of this family. Do not let us lose each other now. Press subscribe and let us keep walking this road together. My name is Samuel Ridgewalker, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a ranger in Pisgah National Forest for 10 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was late August 1956, and the air hung thick and heavy like wet wool, the kind of humidity that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've walked 100 yards. I was working alone on a remote section of trail maintenance near Grandfather Mountain, miles from the nearest parkway access. My wife Mary had packed me a lunch that morning, ham sandwich and an apple, and reminded me our youngest had a piano recital that evening. Normal things. Safe things. I'd fought in the Pacific during the war. Saw things that still woke me up some nights, sweating and gasping. That's why I took this job when I came home in '46. The mountains were supposed to be peaceful, a place where the worst thing you'd encounter was a startled black bear or a tourist who'd wandered off the marked trail. That morning started like any other. I was checking trail markers along Devil's Backbone Ridge, a sharp rocky spine that ran for about 3 miles through dense rhododendron and pine. The Cherokee had used this route long before white folks ever set foot in these mountains. You could still find arrowheads if you looked hard enough, and sometimes I'd come across old pottery shards weathered smooth by rain and time. The trouble started with the reports. Over the past 2 weeks, 4 different hikers had come into the ranger station talking about strange lights on the ridge. Dancing lights, they called them. Some said they looked like lanterns swinging in the wind. Others swore they moved with purpose, like someone was signaling. I told the station chief it was probably just the Brown Mountain lights, swamp gas, or car headlights reflecting off the clouds. We got reports like that every few years. Tourists getting spooked by natural phenomena they didn't understand. But the chief wanted me to check it out anyway, make sure there wasn't anything dangerous up there. A gas leak, maybe, or kids fooling around with flares. So there I was, clipboard in hand, walking the trail I'd walked 100 times before. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Usually, these woods were full of sound. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the rustle of deer moving through the underbrush. But that morning everything was quiet. Too quiet. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. Not even the buzz of insects. That's strange, I muttered, more to hear my own voice than anything else. I kept going, checking each trail marker as I went. White blazes painted on trees, showing hikers the way. Every quarter mile, regular as clockwork. I'd painted most of them myself over the years, knew exactly where each one should be. But when I reached the section of trail where the hikers had reported seeing lights, something was off. The markers were wrong. Not missing. Wrong. Someone had moved them. 7 markers, all arranged in a perfect spiral pattern on the ground, laid out like a strange compass rose. I crouched down, examining them. These were wooden markers, each one nailed to a tree. Someone had pried them loose and arranged them here. But why? And how? It would have taken hours of work, and these nails were bent like someone had twisted them with bare hands. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. I pulled out my notebook and sketched the pattern, then checked my watch. 10:47 a.m. I had a long day ahead of me. That's when I saw the first symbol. Carved into the rock outcrop beside the trail, fresh cuts in the stone. It looked old. Cherokee, maybe. But the edges were sharp, newly made. A circle with radiating lines, like a sun. Beneath it, something that looked like footprints. Dozens of them, all pointing west. West, toward the Trail of Tears route. I felt cold suddenly, even though sweat was still dripping down my face. My father had told me stories about the removal, how they'd marched the Cherokee out of these mountains in 1838. Thousands of them, forced to walk to Oklahoma in the dead of winter. Hundreds died. This ridge had been one of their rest stops along the way, a place where families had huddled together on cold ground, watching their homeland disappear behind them. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was being foolish, letting old stories get to me. There had to be a rational explanation. Vandals, probably. Kids who'd read about the history and thought it would be fun to carve symbols and move trail markers around. I stood up, brushing dirt off my knees, and pulled out my surveying equipment. Might as well do a proper check of the area while I was here. If there was any kind of hazard, gas leak, electrical problem from old power lines, my instruments would pick it up. I set up the transit level, lined up the site, and checked the elevation. The needle spun wildly, the compass inside rotating like a top. I tapped it, thinking something was jammed. The needle kept spinning. What the hell? I picked up the device, examined it closely. No damage, no obvious problems. But the compass wouldn't settle. I pulled out my regular pocket compass. Same thing. The needle turned slowly, continuously, never finding north. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind chimes, distant and delicate, coming from up the ridge. But there was no wind. The air hung still and heavy as before. I looked up the trail. Through the trees, maybe 200 yards away, I could see the highest point of Devil's Backbone, a bare rock outcrop where you could see for miles on a clear day. The sound was coming from there. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, head back to the station, file a report, and let someone else deal with whatever this was. But I'd been a soldier before I was a ranger. I'd learned to walk toward danger, not off. I from it. Besides, it was probably just the wind hitting the rocks at a strange angle. Sound did funny things in the mountains. I shouldered my pack and started climbing. The trail got steeper as I climbed, rocky and loose underfoot. The rhododendron pressed in close on both sides, creating a green tunnel that blocked out most of the sunlight. In the gloom, I had to watch every step. One wrong move and you could twist an ankle, or worse, fall into one of the deep crevices that split the ridge in places. The wind chime sound had stopped, but I kept hearing other things. Footsteps behind me, twigs snapping in the woods to my left. Every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. Getting spooked like a tourist, I said aloud, forcing a laugh. It sounded hollow in the quiet. When I reached the outcrop, the view took my breath away like it always did. The Blue Ridge Mountains rolled away in every direction, layer after layer of blue-green peaks fading into hazy distance. On a clear day, you could see into Tennessee from here. Today, storm clouds were building to the west, dark towers of gray that meant rain by evening. I set down my pack and pulled out my water canteen, taking a long drink. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it felt good on my dry throat. I checked my watch again. 12:15 p.m. I should eat lunch, then head back down. There was nothing up here except rocks and wind. But as I reached for my lunch bag, I saw them. The markers. Every single trail marker I'd put up on this section of ridge, 30, maybe 40 wooden blazes, all arranged in a circle around the highest point of the outcrop. They formed a perfect ring, each one standing upright, like someone had planted them in the stone itself. That wasn't possible. The rock was solid granite. You couldn't just stick wood into it. You'd need a drill, cement, hours of work. And I'd been up here 2 weeks ago. These hadn't been here then. I walked to the nearest marker, knelt down, tried to pull it out. It didn't budge. I gripped harder, put my back into it. Nothing. It was like the wood had grown from the stone itself, roots reaching down into solid rock. My hands were shaking now. I stood up, turned in a slow circle, looking at the ring of markers. There had to be an explanation. Had to be. Maybe someone had used some kind of glue, some new adhesive I didn't know about. Maybe. The temperature dropped. Just like that, in the space of a heartbeat, the air went from summer heat to autumn chill. I could see my breath misting in front of my face. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay, Sam, time to go." I grabbed my pack and turned toward the trail. That's when I saw her. A woman stood at the edge of the trees, maybe 20 feet away. She wore old-style clothing, a long dress made of rough fabric, a shawl around her shoulders. Her feet were wrapped in cloth, blood-stained and torn. Her face was thin, hollow-cheeked, her eyes dark and deep. She was looking right at me. "Hello?" I called. My voice cracked. "Are you all right? Are you lost?" She didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there, staring. I took a step toward her. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be up here. The trail back to the parkway is—" She vanished. Not walked away, not ducked into the trees, just disappeared like smoke and wind. I ran to where she'd been standing. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all. The ground was covered in pine needles and small rocks, undisturbed. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. I'd seen her. I'd seen her as clearly as I'd see my own hand in front of my face. She'd been real. She'd been standing right there. But she couldn't have been. People didn't just disappear. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get off this ridge as fast as my legs could carry me. But rangers don't run. We investigate. We solve problems. That's the job. I forced myself, left to breathe slowly, to think. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe the heat had gotten to me more than I realized. Maybe I'd fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing. I pulled out my canteen, took another long drink, splashed some water on my face. The cold helped clear my head. "Hallucination," I said firmly. "Heat exhaustion, that's all it is." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The air was still cold, my breath still misted, and the temperature had dropped before I'd seen the woman, not after. I needed to get back to the station, file a report, maybe bring someone else up here to check things out. Thomas Barefoot, he was a Cherokee elder who sometimes helped us with historical information. If anyone would know what those symbols meant, it would be him. I shouldered my pack and started down the trail. Fast, but not running. My old drill sergeant's voice in my head. Never run from danger unless you know what you're running from. You might run right into something worse. I was about halfway down when I heard the voices. Singing. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, singing in a language I didn't know. The Cherokee language, I realized. A sad song, slow and mourning, echoing off the rocks and trees. I stopped walking. The singing surrounded me, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Men's voices, women's voices, children's voices, all singing together, all sad beyond measure. And then I saw them. All of them. The trail ahead of me filled with people. Hundreds of them walking slowly westward, heads down, shoulders slumped. They wore torn clothing, carried bundles of belongings. Children held their mothers' hands. Old people leaned on walking sticks, barely able to stand. They were translucent, like colored glass, like looking through water. I could see the trees through them, the rocks, the trail. But they were there. Real, walking past me like I wasn't even present. A young boy stumbled, fell. His mother helped him up, murmuring words I couldn't understand. Tears ran down both their faces. I pressed myself against a tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was the Trail of Tears. This was the forced march, the removal. This was 1838, playing out in front of me like a movie, like a window into the past. A man walked by, close enough to touch. He turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were full of pain and anger and sorrow. He opened his mouth and spoke. I heard the words clear as day, even though his lips didn't move. "Remember us. Tell them what happened. Don't let them forget." Then he was past me, following the others down the trail. The whole procession moved forward. Hundreds of spirits walking the path they'd walked more than 100 years ago, still trapped in their moment of suffering. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. The singing faded. The figures grew dimmer. Finally, they were gone, and I was alone on the trail again in the quiet woods. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on a rock, shaking. What I'd just seen, it wasn't possible. Couldn't be possible. But I'd seen it, and that man had spoken to me, had asked me to remember, to tell their story. I pulled out my notebook with trembling hands and started writing. Everything I'd seen, every detail I could remember. The woman at the outcrop, the singing, the procession, the man's words. When I finished, I looked up at the ridge above me. The storm clouds had moved closer. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The lights the hikers had reported, they weren't swamp gas or car headlights. They were spirits, the lost souls of the Trail of Tears, trying to make people see them, trying to make people remember. I had to get back to the station, had to talk to Thomas, had to figure out what to do. But as I stood up to leave, I saw them again. Lights, dozens of glowing orbs floating between the trees. They moved slowly, deliberately, forming turns in the air. Circles and spirals and lines, like they were writing something. And they were moving toward me. I backed down the trail, eyes fixed on the lights. They followed, drifting through the trees like lanterns carried by invisible hands. The closer they got, the colder the air became. My teeth started to chatter. "I see you," I called out. "I saw what happened to you. I understand." The lights stopped moving. They hung in the air, pulsing gently, like they were listening. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. The old military signal. The lights responded. 3 pulses, 3 long pulses, 3 pulses. They were communicating. They understood. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the empty woods. The lights began to move again, but differently now. They arranged themselves into shapes. First, the symbol I'd seen carved in the rock, the sun with radiating lines. Then footprints, pointing west. Then something else, something that made my blood run cold. A shape like a person, surrounded by smaller lights. The person shape was reaching out, like it was trying to grab something. The smaller lights scattered, fleeing. They were showing me something. A warning, maybe, or a threat. "I'll help you," I said. "I'll tell people what happened. I'll make sure they remember." The lights pulsed brighter, almost blindingly. Then they rushed toward me all at once. I threw up my arms, shouting, certain they were going to attack, but instead of touching me, they passed around me, through me, carrying with them images and feelings that hit like physical blows. Cold, hunger, fear, feet bleeding on frozen ground, children crying, old people collapsing, soldiers shouting, dogs barking, the smell of sickness, the sound of coughing, the taste of despair. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. These weren't just memories. They were lived experiences, poured directly into my mind. I felt what they had felt, saw what they had seen, experienced their suffering like it was my own. A woman holding her baby, the child cold and still. A man watching his father die by the side of the trail. A girl no older than my own daughter, too weak to walk, being carried by her brother. Over and over, moment after terrible moment, the horror of the Trail of Tears unfolding in my head. "Stop," I gasped. "Please stop. I understand. I understand." The images faded. The lights drew back, forming a circle around me where I knelt on the trail. My face was wet. I was crying, I realized. Tears for people who died before I was born. Tears for suffering I'd never known. I wiped my eyes, took a shaky breath. "I'll help you," I said again. "I promise. But you have to let me go. Let me get back to the station so I can start making this right." The lights pulsed once, then began to drift away into the forest. But I could feel them watching me. Waiting. They'd shown me what they wanted me to know. Now they expected me to act. I got to my feet, my legs still unsteady. The sun was lower now, the storm clouds nearly overhead. I needed to move fast if I wanted to get off the mountain before the rain hit. But as I started down the trail, I heard footsteps behind me. Human footsteps, heavy boots on stone and dirt. I turned. A soldier stood there, but not a modern soldier. He wore an old uniform, 1830s, I guessed, and carried a rifle with a bayonet fixed to the end. His face was hard, cruel. He stared at me with eyes full of hate. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from inside a cave. "These mountains belong to us now." "You're not real," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "You're dead. You've been dead for over 100 years. He smiled, showing broken teeth. "Dead don't mean gone, Ranger. Dead just means angry." He raised the rifle, pointing it at my chest. I ran. I crashed down the trail, branches whipping my face, rocks turning under my feet. Behind me I heard him laughing, heard his boots pounding after me, heard other voices joining his. More soldiers, more men who'd driven the Cherokee from their homes. The lights appeared again, streaming past me, heading toward the soldiers. I heard shouts, curses, the sound of confusion. The lights were buying me time. But I knew they couldn't hold the soldiers for long. These were different spirits, not sad and suffering, but angry and violent. They'd been cruel in life, and death hadn't changed them. I burst out of the trees onto a wider section of trail, my lungs burning. The ranger station was still 2 miles away. I'd never make it, not with them chasing me. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun, fists raised, ready to fight. But it was the woman I'd seen at the outcrop. Up close, I could see she was young, maybe 25, and her eyes were kind despite the sadness in them. "Follow me," she said, quickly. She led me off the trail into a part of the forest I'd never explored. The trees grew thick here, the underbrush nearly impassable, but she moved through it like water, and somehow I found myself able to follow, pushing through places that should have been blocked. We came to a small cave hidden behind a fallen tree. "In here," she said. "They won't find you." I squeezed into the cave. It was barely big enough for one person, the walls pressing close. The woman knelt at the entrance, looking back the way we'd come. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because you saw us," she said. "Because you listened. Because you promised to remember." "Who are you?" "My name was Sarah Walkingstick. I died on this ridge in February 1839. I was carrying my daughter. She died 3 days later." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were full of tears. "We've been here ever since, trying to make people understand what happened, but no one would listen. They led us lights. They called us ghosts. They called us swamp gas." "I'm listening now," I said. "I'm listening, Sarah." She smiled, and for a moment she looked almost alive. "The soldiers are angry. They don't want the story told. They want their cruelty forgotten. But we won't let that happen. Not anymore." Outside the cave I heard voices, shouting. The soldiers were searching. "Stay quiet," Sarah whispered. "Stay still." I held my breath as boots crunched past the cave entrance. One soldier stopped so close I could have reached out and touched him. He looked around, rifle raised, suspicious. "Nothing here," another voice called. "Trail's empty. He must have kept going." "Find him," the first soldier growled. "Can't have him spreading lies about what we done." They moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Sarah turned back to me. "You need to talk to Thomas Barefoot. Tell him what you've seen. He'll know what to do. He'll help us make this right." "How do you know Thomas?" "We know everyone who visits this mountain, everyone who respects what happened here. Thomas has been trying to get a memorial built for years. Now he'll have proof. Now he'll have you." The lights appeared again, filling the entrance to the cave with soft, warm glow. "Go now," Sarah said. "While the soldiers are looking elsewhere, the lights will guide you back to the station. And Sam?" She reached out, her translucent hand hovering near mine. Thank you for seeing us, for believing. Then she faded, and I was alone in the cave with only the lights for company. I crawled out, my body aching, my mind reeling. The lights formed a path through the forest, glowing brighter as the day darkened. Storm clouds covered the sky now, and the first drops of rain began to fall. I followed the lights. They led me down paths I'd never known existed, across streams and over rocks, always moving toward the station. Whenever I stumbled, they'd slow down, waiting for me. Whenever I felt like giving up, they'd pulse brighter, urging me on. It took an hour to reach the station. By the time I stumbled out of the trees, I was soaked with rain and covered in mud. The lights hung back at the tree line, watching. I turned to look at them one more time. They pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. A goodbye, a thank you, a promise. Then they faded into the storm. I burst into the ranger station, dripping water all over the floor. Chief Peterson looked up from his desk, eyes widening. Good God, Sam, what happened to you? I need to call Thomas Barefoot, I said, my voice hoarse. Right now, it's urgent. The chief stood up. Sam, you look like you've been through a war. Sit down. Tell me what's going on. No time. I grabbed the phone on his desk and dialed Thomas's number from memory. He answered on the 3rd ring. Thomas, it's Sam Ridgewalker. I need you at the station. Now. I know what's happening on Devil's Backbone Ridge. There was a pause. You've seen them, haven't you? The spirits. You knew? My grandfather told me stories. Said the ridge was haunted by the souls of our people who died during the removal. Said they'd been trying to speak for generations, but no one would listen. I've been asking for a memorial for 15 years, Sam. 15 years. And the Park Service keeps saying there's no budget, no space, no justification. There's justification now, I said. I saw them, Thomas, all of them. I talked to them. They showed me everything. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and turned to Chief Peterson. He was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Chief, I know how this sounds. You're telling me the lights are ghosts? Cherokee ghosts? Not just ghosts, spirits. Souls that never found peace because nobody remembered what happened to them. And they're not the only ones up there. The soldiers who drove them out, they're there too. And they're angry. They don't want the story told. The chief sat down slowly. Sam, I've known you for 10 years. You're the most level-headed, practical man I've ever worked with. If you're telling me this, then something happened up there. Something real. It was real, all of it. And we need to do something about it. When Thomas arrived, he brought something I hadn't expected. A group of Cherokee elders, 6 of them, all dressed in traditional clothing. They filled the small station office, bringing with them a sense of quiet dignity and ancient knowledge. Thomas introduced them, then turned to me. Tell us everything. Don't leave anything out. I did. The moved trail markers, the symbols carved in stone, the vision of the Trail of Tears, Sarah walking stick, the soldiers, the lights. Every detail, no matter how impossible it sounded. When I finished, the elders spoke quietly among themselves in Cherokee. Finally, the oldest, a woman named Ruth Birdfield, spoke in English. The spirits have been waiting a long time for someone who would truly see them. My great-great-grandmother walked that trail. She survived, but her husband and 2 of her children didn't. She told my grandmother about the lights she saw on the last night, how the spirits of those who died seemed to dance in the air, free at last from their suffering. But she said some spirits couldn't leave. They were bound to the places where they died, trapped by sorrow and anger. How do we free them? I asked. By remembering, Ruth said. By honoring. By making sure their story is never forgotten. We need to go up there, Thomas said. Tonight, during the storm. The spirits are strongest when the weather matches what they felt. The cold, the rain, the darkness. Chief Peterson shook his head. It's not safe. That trail is dangerous enough in good weather. I'll go, I said. I promised Sarah I'd help them. I'm not breaking that promise. We'll all go, Ruth said. The other elders nodded. This is our burden as much as yours. So that's how I found myself climbing Devil's Backbone Ridge in the middle of a thunderstorm, surrounded by 6 Cherokee elders and 1 very nervous park ranger chief. The wind howled through the trees. Lightning split the sky. Rain came down in sheets, making the trail a river of mud. But the lights were there, showing us the way. More of them now. Hundreds, maybe thousands, spreading through the forest like stars brought down to earth. When we reached the outcrop, the full force of the storm hit us. Thunder shook the ground. Rain stung like needles. But we could all see them now, the spirits of the Trail of Tears, standing in a great circle around us. Men, women, children, all watching with hope in their translucent faces. And beyond them, the soldiers. Dozens of them, rifles raised, faces twisted with rage. You can't change history, one of them shouted. What's done is done. Thomas stepped forward. History doesn't change, but it can be acknowledged. It can be honored. He began to sing in Cherokee, and the other elders joined him. A mourning song, ancient and powerful, words that had been sung for centuries. The spirits of the Cherokee began to glow brighter, their forms becoming more solid, more real. The soldiers rushed forward. I stepped in front of the elders, ready to fight, even though I knew these weren't enemies I could punch or shoot. But the lights surrounded us, forming a wall of brilliant white that the soldiers couldn't cross. Ruth stepped forward and began to speak. She spoke in Cherokee, but somehow I understood every word. A prayer for the dead, a blessing for the lost, a promise that they would be remembered. As she spoke, the spirits began to change. The sadness in their faces eased. The pain in their eyes faded. One by one, they started to smile. Sarah appeared at the front of the crowd. She looked at me and nodded. Thank you, she said, though I heard her voice in my head rather than my ears. You kept your promise. We'll build a memorial, I said, right here. We'll tell your story. Everyone who comes to this mount, and will know what happened. The spirits began to rise, lifting up into the storm-dark sky. They moved together, a river of light flowing upward, finally free. Their suffering had been acknowledged. Their story would be told. They could rest now, but the soldiers remained. They stood outside the circle of elders, trapped by their own anger and cruelty, unable to move on, unable to find peace because they refused to accept what they'd done. Ruth turned to face them. You're bound here by your own choices, she said, by the evil you committed and never admitted. You'll stay here, watching the memorial, seeing people remember the suffering you caused. That's your punishment. That's your prison. The soldiers howled with rage, but they couldn't cross the barrier the lights had made. They couldn't touch us. They were trapped in their own hate forever. The last of the Cherokee spirits disappeared into the sky. The lights faded. The storm began to ease. We stood on the outcrop in the gentle rain, exhausted, but somehow lighter. The mountain felt different now, still powerful, still old, but no longer heavy with unspoken sorrow. They're free, Thomas said quietly. After all these years, they're finally free. It took 6 months to get approval for the memorial. I testified before the Park Service. Thomas brought documentation, journals, letters, historical records proving that Devil's Backbone Ridge had been a rest stop on the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Nation sent representatives. Even Chief Peterson backed us up, describing what he'd witnessed that night. Finally, they approved it. The memorial was dedicated on a warm spring day in 1957. A bronze plaque mounted on the outcrop, engraved with the names of those known to have died on this section of the trail. Around it, we planted native flowers, bloodroot and trillium and wild iris, the plants the Cherokee would have known. Ruth Birdfield said a blessing. Thomas sang a song his grandfather had taught him. I stood with Mary and our children, watching as hundreds of Cherokee people from all over came to pay their respects to ancestors they'd never known but would never forget. That night, after everyone had gone home, I went back to the ridge alone. I wanted to see if the lights would return. They did. But they were different now, peaceful, gentle, dancing in the air without sadness or pain. They formed patterns in the darkness, beautiful and free. Sarah appeared one last time. She stood beside the memorial, reading the inscription with her translucent hand resting on the bronze. "You did it," she said. "You kept your promise." "Are you at peace now?" I asked. "Yes, finally, yes. But I wanted to thank you one more time. You gave us back our story. You gave us back our names." She smiled. "Tell your children about us, Sam. Tell your grandchildren. Don't let them forget." "I won't. I promise." She faded into the lights, and they rose together into the night sky, stars returning to their proper place. I go back to the ridge every year on the anniversary of the memorial's dedication. The lights always appear, always dance, always welcome me. Other people see them now too. Hikers, campers, tourists. They take pictures and videos, proof that something extraordinary exists on Devil's Backbone Ridge. Some people say they're spirits. Others say they're some kind of natural phenomenon science hasn't explained yet. But everyone who sees them feels the same thing, a sense of sorrow for what was lost, and hope that remembering can heal old wounds. The soldiers are still there too. Sometimes, late at night, you can hear them shouting in the woods, cursing and raging. But they can't hurt anyone anymore. They're trapped in their own anger, bound to watch as generation after generation visits the memorial and honors the people they tried to erase from history. My children are grown now, with children of their own. I bring them to the ridge every summer, show them the memorial, tell them the story of Sarah Walking Stick and the Trail of Tears. They see the lights and understand that some things are bigger than we are. Sorrow that echoes through centuries, pain that demands to be acknowledged, love that never dies. Last week, my oldest granddaughter asked me, "Grandpa, are the lights real?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "Yes," I said finally. "They're real. But more importantly, the people they represent were real. And as long as we remember them, as long as we tell their story, they'll never truly be gone." She nodded, watching the lights dance between the trees, and I knew she understood. The dead don't forget, but neither should the living. And up on Devil's Backbone Ridge, in the heart of Pisgah National Forest, the lights still dance every night. A reminder, a memorial, a promise kept. My name is Augustus Thornfield, but everyone calls me Gus. I've been a ranger in the Chattahoochee National Forest for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was early September 1959, and the heat was all wrong. Should have been cooling down by then, but instead we had this thick, heavy air that made your shirt stick to your back even in the shade. The drought had been going on for weeks. Everything was dry and brittle, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I'd just finished my morning coffee at the ranger station when the call came in. A Boy Scout troop hadn't reported back from their camping trip on Blood Mountain. They were supposed to check in yesterday afternoon. Now it was past noon the next day, and nobody had heard a word. "Could just be radio trouble," my supervisor said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Take the Jeep up as far as you can, then hike in. They're camped near Slaughter Gap." Even the name of that place should have warned me. I'd been up Blood Mountain more times than I could count. 11 years patrolling these woods, you get to know every trail, every clearing, every rock formation. The mountain earned its name honestly. Back in the 1700s, the Cherokee and Creek nations fought some of their bloodiest battles right here. The old-timers in town said you could still find arrowheads after a heavy rain, washing up out of the red Georgia clay. My wife, Mary, packed me extra supplies that morning. She always worried when I went on the long patrols, especially after what happened in the war. I'd served in Europe, seen things that still woke me up at night sometimes, but at least in the war, you knew what you were fighting. The enemy wore a uniform. They followed rules, more or less. "You be careful up there," Mary said, kissing my cheek. Our daughter Jenny was already at school. She was 15 now, getting interested in boys and makeup instead of hiking with her old man like she used to. Time moves too fast. "It's just some scouts who probably wandered off the trail," I told Mary. "I'll find them by dinner." I wish I'd been right. The Jeep could only take me so far. After that, it was boots and backpack, hiking up the old Indian trail that wound around Blood Mountain's north face. The forest felt wrong from the start. Too quiet. In 11 years, I'd never heard it this quiet. Usually the woods are full of sound, birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But that day, nothing. Just my boots crunching on the dry leaves and my own breathing. Even the wind seemed to have died. I tried to shake off the feeling. Just the drought, I told myself. Animals were probably hunkered down somewhere cool, waiting out the heat. But my gut knew better. In the war, I'd learned to trust that feeling when something wasn't right. The hair standing up on your neck, that cold spot in your stomach. Your body knows danger before your brain catches up. I found the scout camp just before 3 in the afternoon. Everything was there. Tents standing neat and proper. Cooking gear laid out like they'd been preparing dinner. Even a baseball and gloves sitting beside one tent, like some kid had just put them down to go help with the food. But no people. Not a single one. 12 Boy Scouts and 2 adult leaders. Just gone. I called out, my voice echoing through the silent trees. "Hello? Anyone here? This is Ranger Thornfield." Nothing. I walked through the camp slowly, looking at everything. This wasn't right at all. When people leave a campsite, they take their stuff. They don't leave their packs behind, their sleeping bags, their food. And these scouts, they were organized. Everything was in its place. No signs of panic, no struggle, no mess. It was like they'd all jail. Yost stood up and walked away in the middle of setting up dinner. I checked my watch. 3:15. I had maybe 4 hours of good daylight left. The smart thing would be to hike back down, get a proper search party organized, come back with more men and equipment. But 12 kids were missing. Every minute counted. I pulled out my compass to start a grid search of the area. That's when I noticed the needle. It was spinning. Not just drifting, spinning in slow circles like it couldn't find north. I tapped it, thinking maybe I'd dropped it somewhere and broken it. But no, the glass wasn't cracked. I held it steady, watching. The needle just kept going around and around. Equipment failure, I thought. Had to be. But when I checked my watch again, my stomach dropped. The second hand was moving backwards. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my watch. Tick, tick, tick. Each second going the wrong way. I wound it, thinking maybe I'd done something wrong that morning when I set it. But it kept right on going backwards. "Okay," I said out loud, just to hear something in all that silence. "Okay, Gus, you're tired. The heat's getting to you. Just take it slow and work the problem." I'd done plenty of search and rescue operations. You follow a pattern. Check the obvious places first. Trails, water sources, clearings. Look for tracks, broken branches, any sign of passage. Most lost people don't go far. They panic and wander in circles, usually ending up close to where they started. I began walking a spiral pattern out from the camp, marking trees as I went so I wouldn't lose my bearings. The forest stayed silent. Not even the sound of a creek, though I knew there was one nearby. Everything was dry, dead quiet. About 50 yards from camp, I found the first thing that made my skin crawl. War paint. Someone had painted symbols on the trees. Red and black marks, fresh enough that I could still smell the pigment. Not spray paint or anything modern. This was the old way, the way the Cherokee used to mark their war trails. I knew a little about Cherokee culture from my years in these mountains. Enough to recognize war symbols when I saw them. These weren't the kind of marks you'd find in a history book or a museum display. These were specific, powerful designs that warriors painted before battle, and they were wet. Still tacky to the touch. My hand was shaking when I pulled it away. I wiped the paint on my pants and kept walking, but something had shifted in my chest. That cold feeling was spreading. 50 yards further, I found an arrowhead stuck in a tree trunk, not buried in old wood, not something that had been there for 200 years. This arrow was fresh. I could see the clean cut where it had penetrated the bark. The stone point was sharp enough to shave with, and when I touched it, it was still warm. Impossible. Nobody made arrows like this anymore. And even if they did, what were the chances I'd find one out here, today, right where those scouts had disappeared? I pulled the arrow out and put it in my pack. Evidence, I thought. Though evidence of what, I couldn't say. The sun was getting lower now, the shadows stretching long between the trees. I should have been finding something by now, footprints at least. 12 kids and 2 adults don't vanish into thin air without leaving tracks. But the ground showed nothing. Just dry leaves and harder earth underneath, undisturbed. That's when I heard it. Drums. Soft at first. So soft I thought maybe it was my own heartbeat. But no, this was coming from somewhere to the east, deeper up the mountain. A steady rhythm, slow and purposeful. The kind of drums you'd hear before a battle. I'd heard drums like that before. In Europe, during the war, there'd been a night when we'd gotten separated from our unit. Me and 3 other guys, lost behind enemy lines. We'd heard drums in the distance, some village celebration maybe. The sound had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at all. But these drums felt the same way. No clear direction, just everywhere, filling up the silent forest. "Hello?" I called out again. My voice sounded small. "If someone's out there, this isn't funny. I'm looking for missing Boy Scouts." The drums kept going. And then, between the beats, I heard something else. Chanting. Low voices singing in a language I didn't know. Cherokee, maybe, or Creek. The words rose and fell with the drums, getting louder, coming closer. I should have run then. Every instinct I had from the war was screaming at me to get out, get back to the Jeep, get off this mountain. But those were kids out here somewhere. I'd made a promise when I put on this uniform. You don't leave people behind. I moved toward the sound, my hand on the knife at my belt. Not much of a weapon, but it was something. The chanting grew louder. Now I could hear footsteps too, lots of them, moving through the brush, moving fast, moving in formation, like soldiers. I came around a massive oak tree and stopped cold. There were men standing in the clearing ahead, 20, maybe 30 of them. They wore nothing but breechcloths and war paint, their faces covered in red and black designs. Their heads were shaved except for a strip down the middle, decorated with feathers. They carried bows, tomahawks, war clubs, Cherokee warriors. But that was impossible. This wasn't a reenactment. There were no tourists around, no film crews, nothing that would explain why these men were here dressed like this. And the way they stood, absolutely still, absolutely silent now that the chanting had stopped, made my blood run cold. I could see through them, not completely. They weren't like ghosts in a movie, all transparent and floating. But the trees behind them showed through their bodies, like they were made of smoke that had been shaped into the forms of men. One of them turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were black from edge to edge, no whites, no iris, just solid black like holes into nothing. "Jesus," I whispered. They all turned then, every single one of them, and looked at me with those terrible empty eyes. I ran. I don't remember much about that run. Just branches hitting my face, my boots pounding on hard ground, my breath tearing out of my lungs. Behind me I could hear them coming. Not running. They didn't need to run. They were just there, keeping pace with me no matter how fast I went. I made it back to the scout camp and grabbed my pack, my mind racing. Had to get help. Had to get off this mountain. But those kids, where were those kids? The sun was setting now, painting everything red. Blood Mountain at sunset. The name had never felt so appropriate. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gathering dark, and that's when I saw them again. The warriors. They were standing in a circle around the camp now, just at the edge of the tree line. 30, 40, maybe more, all watching me with those black eyes. One of them stepped forward. He was older than the others, his face lined with age and painted with more complex designs. He carried a staff decorated with feathers and what looked like scalps, a war chief. He raised his staff and pointed it at me. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to hear them to understand. "You're in our territory. You're trespassing on sacred ground." "I'm looking for children," I said, hating how my voice shook. "Boy Scouts. Have you seen them?" The war chief tilted his head like he was trying to remember something from a long time ago. Then he smiled, and it was the worst thing I'd seen yet. His teeth were too sharp, too many of them. He pointed with his staff again, this time toward the peak of Blood Mountain. They had the scouts up there. Somehow I knew it. "Let them go," I said. "Please. They're just kids. They don't belong here." The war chief shook his head slowly. Then he and all the other warriors simply faded away, like morning mist burning off in sunlight. One moment they were there, the next I was alone in the dark with just my flashlight. I knew I should go back down, get help, get a proper search party, tell someone what I'd seen, though who would believe me? Ghost warriors? Cherokee spirits? They'd think the heat had gotten to me. But the truth was crawling up my spine now, cold and certain. This wasn't a normal search and rescue. Those scouts hadn't wandered off or gotten lost. They'd been taken. And whatever had taken them wasn't going to give them back just because I asked nicely. I checked my supplies. Water for 2 days. Food for 3 if I stretched it. Flashlight with fresh batteries. Knife. Rope. First aid kit. Everything a ranger needed for a backcountry emergency. Nothing that would help me fight ghosts. The path up to the peak was steep and rocky. I'd climbed it dozens of times in daylight, but never at night. Every shadow looked wrong now. Every sound made me jump. The flashlight beam swung back and forth as I climbed, picking out rocks and roots and footprints. Small ones. Kids' shoes. Fresh prints in the dust, heading up the mountain. My heart started beating faster. They'd been here. They'd walked this way. But there were only a few sets of prints, and they weren't scattered like kids wandering around would be. They were in a line, single file, like soldiers marching. I followed the prints higher. The air was getting colder now, which made no sense given how hot the day had been. My breath came out in little clouds. The forest around me was still completely silent, but now I could feel things watching me from the dark. Lots of things. Halfway to the peak, I found the first body. No, not a body. A person. One of the adult scout leaders sitting propped against a tree. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. I rushed over, dropping to my knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" He didn't respond, didn't blink. His chest rose and fell. He was breathing. But it was like nobody was home behind his eyes. I shook his shoulder, gently at first, then harder. "No, thing." I checked his pulse, strong and steady. Checked his pupils with my flashlight. They didn't react to the light at all, just stayed wide and empty. It was like his mind was gone, leaving just his body behind. "What did they do to you?" I whispered. A sound behind me made me spin around, flashlight up. Another warrior stood there, younger than the war chief, but just as transparent, just as wrong. He wore paint that looked like flames across his chest. In his hand was a tomahawk that glowed with a soft red light. He pointed at the scout leader, then at himself, then at the mountain peak. "He is ours now. He fights with us." "No," I said. "He's a civilian, a teacher. He doesn't fight." The warrior's expression didn't change. He simply faded away, like he'd never been there. I grabbed the scout leader under his arms and tried to drag him, but he was dead weight and the path ahead was too steep. I'd never get him down the mountain like this, and I still had 12 kids somewhere up above. "I'll come back for you," I promised him, though I didn't know if he could hear. "I swear I'll come back." I left him there and kept climbing. The prince led me to a flat area just below the peak. This was one of the old battlefield sites, where the Cherokee and Creek had fought in 1755. I'd given tours here, told the history to school groups. Hundreds of warriors had died on this spot, fighting over territory and honor and pride. The ground was covered in arrowheads, not old ones buried in the dirt, fresh ones scattered everywhere like someone had just dropped them. And between the arrowheads, I could see other things: war clubs, knives, pieces of broken shields, all of it glowing with that same soft red light. And standing in the middle of it all were the Boy Scouts. All 12 of them stood in perfect military formation, their faces painted with war symbols. Their eyes were black. And just like the warriors, they held weapons, bows, spears, tomahawks, and they held them like they knew how to use them. "Boys," I said quietly, "it's Ranger Thornfield. I'm here to take you home." They didn't move, didn't even seem to hear me. The war chief materialized beside them, and now I could see more warriors appearing from the darkness. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. All standing at attention, all ready for battle. The war chief looked at me and spoke. This time I could hear his words, though his mouth didn't match the sounds. "The mountain demands warriors. It has always demanded warriors. Blood was spilled here, and blood calls for more blood. These young ones are strong. They will fight well in the eternal battle." "They're children," I said. "Let them go." "They are warriors now," the chief said. "As are you, soldier. I can see your war paint. I can smell the battles you have fought. You belong here with us." He was right about one thing. I was a soldier. I'd fought in Europe, survived things that still gave me nightmares. But that was over. I'd come home, built a life, raised a daughter. I wasn't that person anymore. "I'm a ranger," I said. "I protect people. That's my war now." The chief smiled his terrible smile again. "Then protect these warriors. Join us. Fight beside them in the great battle. The war never ends here. We fight forever, as we were meant to fight." All around me, the warriors raised their weapons. The scouts raised their weapons too, their black eyes staring at me without recognition. I was one man with a knife and a flashlight, facing down a ghost army. This was going to end badly. The war chief stepped closer, and I could feel the cold radiating off him like he was made of winter itself. Up close, I could see that his war paint wasn't paint at all. It was blood. Old blood, dried into patterns on his skin. "You fought with honor," he said. "I can see it in you. The courage, the sacrifice. You killed to protect your brothers in arms. That is what warriors do." "That was different," I said, but my voice came out weak. "How?" The chief's black eyes bore into mine. "You took lives. You saw your friends die. You carry the weight of battle even now. What makes you different from us?" I didn't have a good answer. The truth was, he was right. Part of me had never left the war. Part of me was still in those German forests, watching my buddies fall, pulling the trigger again and again because it was kill or be killed. But another part of me had come home, had held my wife, had watched my daughter grow up, had learned to find peace in these mountains, protecting people instead of killing them. "I chose to come home," I finally said. "I chose to be something else. These boys deserve that same choice." The war chief considered this. Behind him, the warriors stood motionless, waiting for his command. The scouts stood the same way, weapons ready, faces blank. "A challenge then," the chief said. "Our way, the warriors' way." He gestured, and the circle of warriors opened up, creating an arena. In the center, the ground was covered in more of those glowing arrowheads and weapons. "Prove you are worthy," the chief said. "Prove your warrior spirit is stronger than theirs. If you succeed, the young ones go free. If you fail," he smiled, "you all join us, forever." I looked at the scouts. 12 kids who should have been roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories, not standing here with dead eyes and weapons in their hands. I thought about Mary, waiting for me at home. About Jenny, who'd already lost too much of her father to the memories of war. But what choice did I have? What kind of challenge? I asked. The war chief pointed to the peak above us. Reach the sacred stone before sunrise. Alone. If the mountain allows you to pass, if you prove your spirit is strong enough, the young ones will be released. And if I don't make it, then you become one of us. As do they. I looked up at the peak. Maybe 300 yards of vertical climb. Rocky, dangerous terrain even in daylight. In the dark, with ghost warriors hunting me, it might as well have been 300 miles, but it was a chance. The only chance those kids had. I'll do it, I said. The war chief nodded. He raised his staff, and suddenly all the warriors vanished, including the scouts. Just disappeared like smoke. I was alone on the mountainside, my flashlight the only source of light in the complete darkness. And then I heard them. Footsteps. All around me in the trees. The warriors were hunting me now, invisible in the darkness. This wasn't just a race to the peak. It was a gauntlet, a test. I started climbing. The rocks were loose and treacherous. Every step could have been my last. I clicked off my flashlight. It made me too easy to target, and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. There was a little moonlight filtering through the trees, just enough to see shapes. An arrow hissed past my head, close enough that I felt the wind of it. I ducked and kept moving, scrambling over rocks, pulling myself up by tree roots and handholds. My training from the war came back. How to move quietly, how to use cover, how to keep going when every muscle screamed at you to stop. Another arrow. This one hit the rock right by my hand, and I felt it. Felt the impact, the realness of it. These weapons could hurt me, could kill me. I climbed faster, my heart hammering. Below me I could hear the warriors coming, their feet silent, but their presence like a weight in the air. They were herding me, driving me toward the peak. This was what they'd done for centuries. Hunted their enemies through these mountains, used the terrain itself as a weapon. A warrior materialized right in front of me, his tomahawk raised. I rolled to the side, felt the weapon whistle past my head, and kept climbing. He laughed, actually laughed, and faded away again. They were playing with me, testing me. My hands were bleeding now, torn up from the rocks. My legs felt like rubber, but the peak was getting closer. I could see the sacred sun, one the chief had mentioned, a massive boulder at the very top of Blood Mountain, where Cherokee medicine men used to pray before battles. Just 100 more feet. 50. The warriors appeared all around me now, dozens of them, forming a corridor I had to pass through. Their black eyes watched me struggle upward. Some of them called out in Cherokee, words I didn't understand but that sounded like challenges, taunts. The war chief stood at the top beside the sacred stone, waiting. My legs gave out. I fell, scrabbling at the rocks, and started sliding back down. This was it. I'd failed. Those kids were trapped forever, and it was my fault. Then I felt something, a hand on my back pushing me upward. I looked over my shoulder and saw nothing, but the presence was there. Someone helping me. No, not someone. Several someones. I could feel them now, all around me. Different presences, lighter somehow than the warriors. Gentler. Women, I realized. The Cherokee women who'd lost sons and husbands in these battles. The mothers and wives who'd mourned on this mountain for centuries. They were helping me climb. With their invisible hands supporting me, I scrambled the last few feet and collapsed at the base of the sacred stone. The war chief looked down at me, and for the first time I saw something like respect in his black eyes. "You made it," he said. "The mountain has spoken. The spirits have chosen." I stood on shaking legs, facing him. "Let the boys go. That was the deal." The chief nodded slowly. He raised his staff one more time, and I felt a shift in the air. The cold presence of the warriors faded. Warmth flooded back into the night. And below me, I heard crying. The scouts were human again, scared and confused, huddled together at the bottom of the slope. Their eyes were normal. The weapons were gone. "Why?" I asked the chief. Why children? Why now? The mountain rise. Remembers, he said quietly. Blood was spilled here. So much blood. It calls for warriors to continue the fight. But perhaps, he looked at me thoughtfully, perhaps the time for that fight has passed. You showed us something tonight. You fought not to kill, but to protect. That is a different kind of warrior. Will this happen again? I asked. Always, he said. The mountain will always remember. But now, it remembers this too, that a warrior came and chose mercy over glory. Perhaps others will learn from your example. He started to fade, becoming translucent again. The other warriors did too, one by one disappearing into the night. Thank you, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was thanking him for. The war chief smiled, a real smile this time, not that terrible grin from before. Thank the mothers, he said. They still remember what it is to lose a child. Then he was gone, and I was alone at the peak of Blood Mountain as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. Getting the boys down the mountain took most of the morning. They didn't remember anything after setting up camp that first day. Just darkness and cold, and a feeling like they'd been dreaming about war. The adult leaders were the same, conscious again, but confused, with no memory of their missing time. I called it in as a successful rescue. Disorientation from heat exhaustion, I said. They'd wandered off, got themselves turned around in the drought conditions. We found them before anything bad happened. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked why my hands were torn up or why I looked like I'd aged 10 years overnight. Rangers get beat up in the woods all the time, but I know what happened, and I know it's not over. I went back to Blood Mountain 3 weeks later, alone, stood at that sacred stone in broad daylight and left an offering. Tobacco and cornmeal, the traditional way, a sign of respect to the spirits that still guard this place. The mountain felt different that day, still dangerous. Blood Mountain will always be dangerous, but not hostile. The silence in the forest was natural now, just animals being quiet in the afternoon heat. My compass worked fine. My watch kept proper time. But at sunset, when the light turned everything red, I thought I saw them again for just a moment. The warriors standing in formation at the tree line, and the war chief watching me with eyes that were no longer black, but simply old and sad and tired. He nodded once, and then they were gone. I've been a ranger for 11 years now, going on 12. I know these mountains better than almost anyone. But I also know there are things in these hills that we don't understand. Powers that were here long before we came and will be here long after we're gone. The Cherokee fought and died on Blood Mountain. Their spirits remain, guarding their sacred ground, still fighting battles that the rest of us forgot long ago. They take warriors when they can find them, adding to their eternal war band. Usually they take people who won't be missed, or who were looking for a fight anyway. But sometimes, rarely, they take the wrong people. And when that happens, someone has to go up there and make it right. That's my job now. Not just maintaining trails and checking camping permits, but keeping an eye on the old places, the sacred places, making sure the past and present don't collide in ways that hurt innocent people. Last month, a hiker reported seeing strange lights near Slaughter Gap. I went up to investigate, brought offerings, spoke words of respect to the spirits. The lights stopped. 2 weeks ago, some teenagers were planning to have a party up at the sacred stone. Beer and music and no respect for what that place means. I told them about the history, about the warriors who died there. Made sure they understood that some places aren't for partying. They found somewhere else to go. And next week, there's a family coming in from Atlanta who want to scatter their gear. Grandfather's ashes on Blood Mountain. He was Cherokee, distantly. I'm going to make sure they do it properly, with respect, so the spirits don't take offense. This is what I do now, Guardian of Blood Mountain, keeper of the boundary between what we know and what we can't explain. My daughter Jenny is 17 now. She wants to be a park ranger like her dad. I tell her about the job, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of helping people, the importance of protecting wild places. But I don't tell her everything. Not yet. Maybe someday when she's older and wearing her own ranger uniform, I'll bring her up to the sacred stone at sunset. I'll teach her about the offerings, the signs to watch for, the old agreements that keep the peace. Maybe she'll see the warriors, too, standing patient guard over the mountain they died defending. Or maybe by then, they'll finally be able to rest. Until that day comes, I keep watch. I patrol these mountains, checking trails and helping tourists and making sure everyone gets home safe. And when the sun sets over Blood Mountain and everything turns red, I remember. I remember those 12 Boy Scouts standing with black eyes and weapons in their hands. I remember climbing that mountain in the dark with ghost warriors hunting me. I remember the war chief's question, "What makes you different from us?" And I remember my answer, "I chose to come home." That's the difference between a warrior and a soldier. A warrior fights forever, bound to the battle even after death. But a soldier fights so that someday there won't be any more battles. So that people like my daughter can grow up safe and free and never have to see the things I've seen. The warriors on Blood Mountain are still fighting. They always will be. That's their sacred duty, their eternal honor. But my duty is different now. My battle is keeping their war and our world separate, so that kids can camp in these mountains and families can hike these trails without stumbling into something older and darker than they can imagine. It's almost sunset. Time to lock up Teal, Ranger Station, and head home to Mary and Jenny. But first, I'll drive past Blood Mountain, just a quick patrol to make sure everything's quiet. The mountain rises up against the evening sky, dark and eternal and beautiful in its own terrible way. And if you know where to look, if you have the eyes to see, you might catch a glimpse of them up there on the peak. The warriors in their war paint, standing guard over sacred ground, waiting for the battle that never ends. Blood Mountain earned its name honestly all those years ago, and it remembers. It always remembers. My name is Jefferson Coleridge, but everyone just calls me Jeff. I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Cave-ins, lost hikers, copperhead bites, even pulled a man out of a sinkhole once. But I never believed those old stories the coal miners used to tell about things living deep in the caves. Should have listened. It was late October of 1963. The kind of morning where fog sits so thick in the hollows you can't see 10 feet ahead. I was 41 years old, raising 2 teenage boys on my own since tuberculosis took my wife 5 years back. The ranger station called me in early that Tuesday. 3 college kids from the University of Kentucky hadn't come back from a cave exploration in Pine Ridge Hollow. They'd been missing 2 days. I grabbed my gear and headed out with Billy Whitman, a younger ranger who'd only been with us about a year. The drive took 45 minutes on dirt roads that wound through pine forests, turning gold and red with autumn. When we finally parked at the trailhead, the fog was so thick it looked like the forest was breathing. "Devil's Kitchen," Billy said, checking the map. That's where they were headed. I knew the place, a limestone cave system that went back at least a mile, maybe more. The old Cherokee used some of those caves for burials, and before that, coal miners in the 1890s dug exploratory shafts looking for new seams. Most of the tunnels were unmarked and dangerous. We hiked in, our boots crunching through frost-covered leaves. The temperature was dropping, but I was sweating under my jacket. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels rustling in the branches. "You ever done a cave rescue?" Billy asked. 4 times, I said. Once in Korea, too. But that's a different story. Main thing is we check for bad air before we go deep. Carbon dioxide settles in low spots. Can knock you out before you know what hit you. We found their campsite first. 2 tents, still standing. A Coleman stove with a pot of beans that had gone moldy. Their car was parked right where it should be, but no kids. The cave entrance sat at the base of a limestone cliff, maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Someone had tied a rope to a tree near the opening, standard practice for cave exploring. I clicked on my headlamp and pulled out my gas detector. Readings are normal, I said. Air's good. Billy stayed at the entrance with the radio while I went in. The plan was simple. I'd go 100 yards, mark my route with chalk, and see if I could find any sign of the students. If nothing turned up, we'd call for more rangers and do a proper grid search. The cave smelled like wet limestone and something else, something sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in a vase. My headlamp cut through the darkness, showing walls covered in flowstone and small stalactites hanging from the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere deeper in. I found their gear about 50 feet inside, right where the main passage split into 2 smaller tunnels. 3 backpacks, 3 coils of rope, 3 helmets with carbide lamps still attached. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. Everything was arranged in a perfect circle, not dropped or scattered like you'd expect if there'd been an accident. Arranged. On purpose. I keyed my radio. Billy? You there? Static. Billy? Nothing. The radio should have worked this close to the entrance. I turned around and my headlamp dimmed like someone had put a hand over it. The batteries were fresh that morning. That's when I noticed how warm it was. Caves in Kentucky stay about 54 degrees year-round. Cold enough you need a jacket. But I was sweating, and when I touched the cave wall, the limestone felt warm, almost body temperature. I should have left right then, should have walked out, called for backup, let someone else deal with it. But those were someone's kids down here. Someone's sons or daughters who went into the earth and didn't come back. So I went deeper. The main passage sloped downward, the ceiling getting lower with each step. I had to duck in places, then crawl through a section where the rock pinched down to barely 3 feet high. My knees scraped on stone and my breath echoed back at me wrong, like the cave was breathing too. I marked my path every 20 feet with chalk arrows pointing back to the entrance. That's Cave Rescue 101. Your light fails. You can feel your way back by following the arrows with your fingers. After about 10 minutes of crawling, the passage opened into a chamber the size of my living room. My headlamp swept across flowstone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls, and there, in the middle of the chamber, I found the first real sign of the students. A jacket, blue denim, University of Kentucky patch on the shoulder. But it wasn't just lying there. It was shredded. Long tears running through the fabric like something with claws had grabbed the person wearing it and pulled. I picked it up and my hands came away sticky. Not blood. The fabric was dry. Something else. Something that smelled like copper and old meat. That's when I heard the screaming. It came from everywhere at once. A young man's voice, high and terrified, echoing through the cave system. But it wasn't just ahead of me or behind me. It was above me, below me, from inside the walls themselves. Help! Oh God, please help! I ran toward the sound, my headlamp bouncing wildly. The passage twisted left, then right, then dropped down a steep slope covered in loose rocks. I half ran, half slid down it, my hands scraping on limestone. Where are you? I shouted. Keep yelling. I'm coming. The screaming stopped. The cave went silent except for my breathing and the ductor, IP of water somewhere in the darkness. I stood there, chest heaving, listening. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then I heard it. Not screaming this time. Breathing. Slow, wet breathing that didn't sound human. It was coming from the passage ahead, where my light couldn't reach. I pulled my service pistol, a Colt 38 Special, that suddenly felt very small. This is Park Ranger Jefferson Coleridge, I called out. If you're hurt, let me know. I'm here to help. The breathing stopped. Something moved in the darkness ahead. I saw it for just a second as it crossed through the edge of my light. A pale shape, tall and thin, moving on all fours, but wrong, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. Then it was gone. I tried my radio again. Still nothing but static. I checked my compass. The needle was spinning in slow circles, never settling on north. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and get out, but there was a torn jacket in my hands and voices in the dark, and those kids were down here somewhere. I kept going. The passage narrowed again, forcing me to crawl on my belly through a squeeze barely wide enough for my shoulders. The rock pressed against my chest, and for a few seconds, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then I was through, dropping into another chamber. This one was different. The walls were covered in scratches, long, deep gouges in the limestone running in parallel lines like something with claws had been sharpening them on the rock. The marks were everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, even the floor, and they were fresh. I could see white stone dust still sitting in the grooves. My headlamp flickered, went out, came back on dimmer than before. In that moment of darkness, I heard something behind me, close behind me. The sound of something large squeezing through the passage I'd just crawled through. I didn't look back. I ran. The chamber had 3 exits. I picked the largest one and went through it at a dead sprint, my boots slipping on wet stone. Behind me I could hear it moving, not running, not walking, but something in between. A scraping, dragging sound, punctuated by clicking noises that might have been claws on rock or might have been something else. I ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The passage twisted and turned, went up and down, branched and rejoined. I lost track of my chalk marks, lost track of direction. The only thing I knew for sure was that something was behind me, and it was getting closer. Then my foot hit empty air. I fell hard, tumbling down a slope of loose rocks and crashing into the bottom of a pit. My headlamp flew off my helmet and landed a few feet away, still burning but cracked. I lay there, trying to catch my breath, waiting for whatever was chasing me to come over the edge of the pit. It didn't. Instead, I heard that wet breathing again, but this time it was all around me, above me, behind me, ahead of me in the darkness. And then I smelled it, that same sweet, rotten flower smell, but 100 times stronger, like standing in a room full of corpses covered in roses. My headlamp went out completely. In the absolute darkness, something touched my face. I screamed and batted at whatever had touched me, scrambling backward until my shoulders hit the cave wall. My hands found my headlamp on the ground and I shook it desperately. It flickered, died, flickered again, then came back on with a weak yellow glow. The pit I'd fallen into was about 15 feet deep and 20 feet across, but that's not what made me stop breathing. The walls were covered in cocoons. That's the only word for them. Man-sized shapes wrapped in something that looked like wet spider silk hanging from the walls and ceiling. I counted 6 of them. No, 7. They were pale gray, almost translucent, and I could see shadows inside them. Shadows that might have been people. One of them was moving. I stood up, my legs shaking so bad I could barely walk, and moved closer. Through the wet silk I could see a face. A young man, maybe 20 years old, his eyes closed. His chest was moving up and down slowly. He was alive. Jesus Christ, I whispered. I pulled out my pocket knife and started cutting through the cocoon. The material was tough, like cutting through wet leather. It took me a full minute to saw through enough to peel it back. The kid's eyes opened. They were completely white. No iris, no pupil, just white. He opened his mouth like he was trying to scream, but no sound came out. Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp. I felt for a pulse. He had one, strong and steady, but he wasn't waking up. That's when I heard the clicking again coming from above me. I looked up. The ceiling of the pit wasn't rock. It was covered in that same gray silk, layer upon layer of it forming a web pattern. And hanging from the center of the web, watching me with eyeless sockets, was the thing that had been following me. It was 8 feet tall, even crouched on all fours. Its skin was the color of old bones, pulled tight over 2 long limbs and joints that bent backward. It had no eyes, just smooth skin where its face should be. Its mouth opened, and I saw rows of thin, needle-like teeth. Then it made a sound. It wasn't a growl or a hiss. It was a perfect imitation of the screaming I'd heard earlier. The young man's voice, crying for help, coming from this thing's throat. "Help! Oh God, please help!" My hand found my pistol. I raised it and fired 3 shots straight into its face. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullets hit the creature and punched right through its head, leaving dark holes that didn't bleed. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it let out a real sound, a high-pitched shriek that made my teeth ache and my ears ring. The cave itself seemed to shake, small rocks falling from the ceiling. I grabbed the kid under his arms and dragged him toward the wall, looking for any way out of the pit. There, a narrow crack in the rock, maybe 2 feet wide. I could fit through it, but just barely. The creature dropped from the ceiling with a wet thud. It landed on all fours, its head tilting side to side like a dog listening to something far away. Then it clicked its teeth together 3 times and started moving toward me. I shoved the kid into the crack and squeezed in after him, dragging him deeper into the narrow space. The creature followed, its 2 long arms reaching into the crack, claws scraping on stone inches from my boots. The crack opened into another passage, this one barely 3 feet high. I pulled the kid along, crawling as fast as I could. Behind us, I could hear the creature forcing itself into the crack, breaking off pieces of rock. My headlamp showed a fork ahead, left or right. No time to think. I went left. The passage got smaller and smaller, until I was belly crawling with the kid's shirt clutched in one hand, dragging him behind me. My helmet scraped the ceiling. I couldn't turn my head, could barely breathe. Then I got stuck. My chest wouldn't fit through the next section. I tried to push forward, but the rock held me tight. Tried to push backward, but the kid's body blocked me. Behind us, getting closer, I heard the scraping and clicking. Panic hit me like ice water. I was going to die here, stuck in this tiny space, unable to move, while that thing pulled me out backward and wrapped me in silk. Then I remembered something my old sergeant in Korea told me. When you're stuck in a tight spot, breathe all the way out. Your chest gets smaller. I exhaled every bit of air in my lungs and shoved forward. Felt skin tear off my back as the rock scraped me raw. But I moved forward an inch. Another inch. Then I was through, gasping, pulling the kid after me. The passage opened into a larger tunnel, tall enough to stand up. I didn't waste time. I grabbed the kid's arm, hauled him up into a fireman's carry, and ran. Behind me, the creature let out. Another shriek, but this one sounded different, frustrated, like it couldn't follow us through the tight passage. I ran until my legs gave out, then walked until I couldn't walk, then crawled. The kid on my back never woke up, but his heart kept beating. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time felt broken down here. Then I saw it, a faint light ahead, not my headlamp, natural light. Gray and weak, but unmistakable. I stumbled toward it, nearly sobbing with relief. The passage opened onto a ledge overlooking a drop of maybe 30 feet. Below, I could see the forest floor through a sinkhole in the cave ceiling. Daylight, real daylight. But between me and that light, blocking the only way down, was the creature. It stood on 2 legs this time, its full height making it look almost human. Almost. Its eyeless face turned toward me, and it clicked its teeth together. Then it spoke in my voice. Never believed those old mining tales about things living in deep caves. My own words, from that morning, coming from its mouth in perfect imitation of my voice. It took a step toward me. I set the kid down gently and raised my pistol, knowing it wouldn't help, but unable to think of anything else to do. The creature tilted its head, and for the first time I understood what I was looking at. This thing wasn't just an animal. It was smart. It had been listening to us, learning our voices, herding us deeper into its territory. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cracking. It opened its mouth and screamed, but this time it wasn't imitating anyone. This was its own voice, a sound like grinding rock and tearing metal mixed with a human scream. The cave walls vibrated, and small stones rained from the ceiling. The scream wasn't random. It was echolocation. I could feel it washing over me, bouncing off my body, mapping me in its eyeless vision. Then it rushed forward. I fired the last. 3 rounds in my revolver. At least one hit it square in the chest, and I saw the dark hole appear. But it didn't slow down. Didn't even flinch. It was on me in seconds, one of those long arms sweeping toward my head. I ducked and felt claws rake across my shoulder, tearing through my jacket and shirt. Hot blood ran down my arm. I stumbled backward and my hand hit something clipped to my belt. My emergency flare. Required equipment for cave rescues, something I'd carried for 13 years and never used. The creature's mouth opened wide, those needle teeth getting ready to... I ripped the flare off my belt, struck it against the rock wall, and shoved it right into that eyeless face. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The creature shrieked and fell backward, its pale skin actually smoking where the flare had touched it. It scrambled away from the light, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Light, I breathed. You can't stand light. I held the flare up like a torch, and the creature retreated further, pressing itself against the far wall of the chamber. In the bright red glow, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its skin was covered in old scars, and what looked like ancient symbols carved into its flesh. Cherokee symbols. This thing had been down here a long time, maybe hundreds of years. But I also saw something else. Behind the creature, in the shadows beyond the flare's reach, there were more cocoons. Dozens of them, and some of them were moving. "How many people have you taken?" I asked, not expecting an answer. The creature's mouth opened, and it spoke again, but this time in a voice so old it sounded like dust. "Bone collectors." The Cherokee knew. They left us offerings. They understood. Not an animal, not even close. "Let them go," I said, holding the flare higher. "All of them, or I swear I'll burn this whole cave down." It was a bluff. One flare wouldn't burn anything. But the creature didn't know that. It clicked its teeth 3 times, and I heard movement behind it. Other creatures, smaller ones. Maybe younger ones. They emerged from the shadows, pale and eyeless, and started pulling cocoons down from the walls. They weren't letting them go. They were gathering them, pulling them deeper into the cave where the flare's light couldn't reach. "No!" I started forward, and the big creature lunged at me. I swung the flare like a weapon, and it connected with the creature's arm. The skin sizzled, and the creature screamed again. That grinding, tearing sound that made my bones ache. The cave started shaking. Not from the scream this time. The creature was doing it on purpose, using that sonic shriek to cause vibrations in the rock. The ledge under my feet cracked, and I heard a deep grinding sound from above. The ceiling was coming down. I grabbed the unconscious kid and ran for the edge of the ledge, looking down at the 30-foot drop. Too far to jump with him on my back, but the sinkhole was right there, daylight streaming through, and the ledge collapsed. We fell, and for a second I was weightless, holding onto the kid, watching the creature above us screaming in rage as the ceiling caved in. We hit water, an underground stream I hadn't seen from above, cold, deep, moving fast. I lost my grip on the kid, went under, felt the current grab me and pull me along. My head broke the surface, and I gasped for air, saw the kid bobbing ahead of me, still unconscious. The stream carried us through a narrow channel, scraping my arms on rocks. Then suddenly we were falling again, down a waterfall into a pool lit by daylight. We'd made it out. I dragged the kid onto a muddy bank and collapsed next to him, coughing up water. Above us, through the trees, I could see the sinkhole we'd fallen through. And behind the falling rocks and dust, I caught a glimpse of pale shapes retreating into the darkness. They weren't following us. The light kept them back. Billy found us 2 hours later, following the sound of the waterfall. By then, I'd gotten a fire going and wrapped the kid in my jacket. Billy radioed for help, and by sunset we had search and rescue, bringing the student out on a stretcher. The other 2 students were never found. The cave system partially collapsed from the creature's sonic attack, sealing off most of the deeper passages. They wanted to send me right back down there soon as the engineers cleared the caves as stable. Wanted me to lead the search team for the other students. I said no. It was the first time in 13 years I'd refused an assignment. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that eyeless face. Every time I heard an echo, my skin crawled. The University of Kentucky student I'd pulled out, his name was David Morrison, spent 3 days in the hospital. He didn't remember anything after entering the cave. The doctors said he was in some kind of shock-induced amnesia. His vitals were normal, but he'd lost 15 pounds in 2 days, like something had been draining him slowly. The official report called it a cave-in. The other 2 students were listed as presumed deceased, bodies unrecovered. The entrance to Devil's Kitchen was sealed with concrete and a steel gate, posted with warning signs about geological instability. No mention of what was really down there. I requested a transfer to Surface Patrol only. They approved it without question. I think they knew something had happened in that cave, even if they didn't want to hear the details. My boys asked why I stopped doing cave rescues. I told them I was getting too old for crawling around in the dark. They believed me. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about those cocoons. How many were there? How many people has that thing taken over the years? And what did it mean when it said the Cherokee left offerings? I went to the library and looked up Cherokee legends about these mountains. Found stories about the bone collectors, spirits that lived in sacred caves and took people who disturbed them. The Cherokee would leave deer carcasses at cave entrances to appease them, keep them fed so they wouldn't hunt humans. When the white settlers came and stopped the offerings, the bone collectors got hungry. 3 months after the cave-in, I got a call from David Morrison's mother. She was worried about him. He was sleepwalking, she said. Every night, he'd get out of bed and walk toward the mountains, toward Pine Ridge Hollow. They'd found him twice standing at the sealed entrance to Devil's Kitchen, trying to pull the steel gate open with his bare hands. He didn't remember any of it when they woke him up. I drove out to visit him. He looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. We sat on his parents' porch, and I asked him if he remembered anything about the cave. Dreams, he said quietly. I dream about hanging in the dark, about being warm and safe and wanted. And there's this voice calling to me, telling me to come home. His eyes met mine, and for just a second, I saw something in them, a flash of white. No iris, no pupil. Then he blinked, and his eyes were normal again. You saved my life down there, he said. The doctors told me. I wanted to say thank you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That was 5 months ago. Last week, David Morrison vanished from his dorm room. His roommate said he got up in the middle of the night, got dressed, and walked out. Said he was going home. They found his car parked at the old trailhead to Pine Ridge Hollow. The steel gate at Devil's Kitchen was torn open. Fresh scratches on the metal, like something with claws, had pulled it apart from the inside. Search and rescue went in yesterday. They found the gate torn open from the inside, not the outside. Something came out, or something was let back in. I'm writing this down because I need people to know. Need them to understand that there are old things in these mountains, things that were here long before us and will be here long after. Things that see us as we see deer, just meat that walks and breathes and can be collected. The Cherokee knew. They made their deal, kept the bone collectors, fed. We broke that deal. And now the bone collectors are hungry again. I'm 41 years old, and I'm afraid of the dark for the first time since I was a child. I sleep with every light in the house on. I won't go into my basement. Can't stand to be in a room without windows. My boys think I'm going crazy. Maybe I am. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I hear it. That clicking sound. Those claws on stone. And I know it's just a matter of time before something comes to collect what it thinks it's owed. I should have left those students in the cave. I should have left them in the dark where they belonged. Because the thing I pulled out wasn't David Morrison anymore. Not completely. Part of him was still down there, hanging in those cocoons, and part of that thing came back with him, and now it knows where we live. The Daniel Boone National Forest is a beautiful place. People come from all over to hike and camp and explore the caves. I used to love this work, love these mountains. Now I just count the days until I can retire and move somewhere flat, somewhere with no caves, no hollows, no dark places for things to hide. But I don't think that'll be far enough. Because late last night, I found something on my porch. A deer carcass, throat torn out, arranged carefully on the welcome mat. An offering. And carved into the wood of my front door, in symbols I'd seen before on pale gray skin, was a message in Cherokee. The bone collectors remember. My name is Margaret Ironbark, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a ranger here in Jefferson National Forest for 15 years now, long enough to know these mountains like the back of my hand, and long enough to know that most of the old stories people tell about them are just that. Stories. I was the first woman they hired as a ranger in this district back in 1956. The men didn't like it much at first, but I had a geology degree, and I wasn't afraid of hard work. After a while, they stopped treating me like I was made of glass. Now, in 1971, I'm just Maggie the Ranger, the one who checks the fire towers, monitors the weather, and keeps an eye on the high country when nobody else wants to go up there. The old-timers around here talk about witches. Mountain witches, they call them. They say back in the old days, when the Scots-Irish first settled these hills, there were women who could control the weather, make it snow when they wanted, freeze a man solid with just a look. I always figured it was just superstition, the kind of stories people tell when they don't understand how nature works. I should have listened better. It was mid-January when the ice storm hit. Not just any ice storm, the kind that comes once every 20 years and shuts down the whole mountain. I was up at the fire tower on White Top Mountain doing my regular weather monitoring when the storm rolled in faster than the forecast said it would. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 2 hours. The wind picked up until it screamed through the metal supports of the tower. Ice started forming on everything, thick, heavy ice that made the whole structure groan and creak. I tried to radio down to the main station. "This is Ironbark at White Top Tower. Storm's getting bad up here. I'm going to need to come down before the road ice is over." Static. Then more static. I adjusted the dial, tried again. Nothing but a hiss of white noise. The phone line was dead too. I picked up the receiver and heard nothing, not even a dial tone. The ice must have brought down the line somewhere between here and civilization. I wasn't too worried at first. I'd been stuck up here before. The tower had supplies, canned food, a kerosene heater, blankets, emergency flares. I could wait out a storm for a few days if I had to. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. That's what I thought anyway. I made myself some coffee on the little camp stove and watched the storm through the windows. The tower sat at 5,500 feet, the highest fire lookout in Virginia. On a clear day, you could see 5 states from up here. Now I couldn't see 20 feet. The world had turned into a white wall of blowing snow and ice. That's when I saw the first light. It was out on the mountain, maybe half a mile away. A blue-white glow, steady and bright, cutting through the storm like a beacon. My first thought was that it was another ranger, or maybe a hiker in trouble, but that didn't make sense. Nobody would be out in this weather. And the light wasn't moving like a flashlight would. It wasn't bouncing around or sweeping back and forth. It just hung there, still and cold. Then I saw a second light, and a third. They appeared one by one, forming a pattern. A circle maybe, or a star. It was hard to tell through the blowing snow. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to focus on them, but the storm was too thick. All I could see was that eerie blue glow pulsing slightly, like something alive. Probably just ice reflecting light somehow, I said out loud. My voice sounded small in the empty tower, but I didn't believe it. I'd seen ice do strange things on these mountains, but nothing like this. I watched the lights for another hour. They didn't move, didn't change, just kept glowing out there in the whiteout, arranged in that perfect geometric pattern that shouldn't have been possible. The temperature kept dropping. My thermometer read -15, and it was still falling. I fired up the kerosene heater and pulled. On every layer I had. 2 sweaters, my heavy coat, gloves, a wool hat. The tower's windows were single-pane glass, and I could feel the cold radiating through them like they weren't even there. That's when I noticed the ice on the windows wasn't forming normally. Ice should form in random patterns, crystals growing wherever they want, following no particular design. But the ice on my windows was different. It was forming in spirals, perfect spirals, like someone had drawn them with a compass. They grew slowly, one crystal at a time, working their way from the edges of the glass toward the center. I touched one of the spirals with my gloved finger. It was so cold it burned, even through the wool. "That's not natural," I whispered. And then I heard it. A sound coming through the radio, even though the radio was off. I walked over and stared at it. The power switch was clearly in the off position, but I could hear voices coming from the speaker. Faint, distant voices, speaking words I didn't understand. Not English, not Spanish. Something older, with harsh consonants and long, drawn-out vowels. I flipped the power switch on, then off again. The voices kept going, unchanging. My hands started to shake, and it wasn't from the cold. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The storm howled around the tower like something alive and angry. The voices on the radio kept murmuring in that strange language. And every time I looked out the window, those lights were still there, glowing in the darkness. By morning, if you could call it morning when the sun barely made it through the storm clouds, the temperature had dropped to -25. The kerosene heater was running full blast, but I could still see my breath inside the tower. I tried the radio again, switching through every channel. On channel 7, I got something. Not the main station, but something. Tower, if you key and respond. My heart jumped. This is Ranger Ironbark at White Top Tower. Can you hear me? Static. Then, not safe. They're coming. Get out. Who's coming? Hello? Please respond. But the voice was gone, swallowed up by static and those strange chanting voices that never seemed to stop. I sat down at the small desk and tried to think logically. I was a ranger. I was trained for emergencies. The procedure was clear. Stay put, conserve resources, wait for rescue. The storm couldn't last forever. Eventually it would clear, and someone would come looking for me. I just had to wait it out. I made myself eat some canned beans for breakfast, even though I wasn't hungry. I needed to keep my strength up. Then I did a full inventory of my supplies. 3 days of food, maybe 4 if I rationed carefully. 2 full kerosene canisters for the heater, emergency flares, a fire axe, a rope, a first aid kit, everything I needed to survive. I was checking the windows for ice damage when I saw the footprints. They were at the base of the tower, circling the metal supports. Fresh footprints in the snow, even though it was still coming down hard enough that they should have been filled in within minutes. Human footprints. Bare human footprints. I pressed my face against the cold glass, trying to see better. The prints were definitely human. I could see the shape of toes, the arch of a foot. But they were too big, maybe a size 13 or 14. And they were walking through -25-degree weather without shoes. That wasn't possible. Bare feet in this cold would mean frostbite in seconds, death in minutes. Unless whoever made them wasn't exactly human. I grabbed the binoculars and scanned the area around the tower. Nothing. Just white snow, dark trees, and those damn lights still glowing out on the mountain. Then I saw movement. Something tall and pale, standing, just at the edge of my vision. It looked like a person in a long white robe, but the robe seemed to be made of ice. Frozen solid, but somehow still moving. The figure stood perfectly still, for a moment, and I swear it was looking right at me. Even though I couldn't see its face, I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Then it took a step toward the tower. I jerked back from the window, my heart pounding. No, that's not real. That's just the storm playing tricks. But when I looked again, the figure was closer, still moving with that same slow, deliberate step. And now I could see there were more of them. 4, 5, 6 figures in ice-covered robes, all walking toward my tower through the blizzard. The tower started to creak, not the normal creaking of metal expanding and contracting in the cold. This was different, rhythmic, almost like chanting. I ran to the radio. Mayday! Mayday! This is Ranger Ironbark at White Top Tower. I need immediate assistance. I stopped. There are what? People made of ice walking toward me? They'd think I'd lost my mind. Hell, maybe I had. The creaking got louder. The whole tower was vibrating now, the metal supports humming with some kind of energy I couldn't explain. The spiral patterns on the windows were growing faster, the ice spreading across the glass like living things. I grabbed the fire axe and stood in the center of the room, turning in circles, watching all the windows at once. My breath came in short gasps. My hands felt numb, even inside my gloves. One of the figures reached the base of the tower. I heard its foot, if it had feet, hit the bottom of the metal stairs. Then another step. And another. Something was climbing up to me. The door to the tower was locked, but it was just a simple bolt lock. Nothing that would stop someone who really wanted to get in. I backed toward the kerosene heater, holding the axe in front of me. The steps kept coming, slow, steady, getting closer. Then they stopped, right outside the door. I waited, the axe raised, ready to swing at whatever came to him. See through. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Maybe it was gone. Maybe. The temperature dropped. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had opened a door to the Arctic. The kerosene heater flickered and went out. Ice formed on the metal walls, spreading so fast I could see it growing. The spiral patterns on the windows completed themselves, and in the center of each spiral was a symbol. An old symbol that I recognized from the Scots-Irish folklore I'd read about. A symbol for binding, for trapping, for freezing. No, I said. My voice came out as a fog of frozen breath. This isn't happening. But it was. I've never been so cold in my life. It wasn't just cold. It was a cold that went through my bones, into my blood, like my body was turning to ice from the inside out. The kerosene heater wouldn't relight. I tried 3 times, but the flame just sputtered and died. It was like the cold was eating the fire before it could even start. I wrapped myself in both blankets and huddled in the corner farthest from the door, the axe across my lap. The figures outside hadn't left. I could feel them there, standing around the base of the tower doing something. The whole structure kept vibrating with that rhythmic humming, and the ice kept spreading. It was covering the inside walls now, thin sheets of white frost that glittered in the dim light coming through the windows. And in the frost I started to see shapes. Not random patterns. Faces. Women's faces. Old, weathered faces with hollow eyes and cruel mouths. They looked like they were screaming, but no sound came out. I squeezed my eyes shut. Not real. You're not real. When I opened them again, the faces were still there, and they were moving, their mouths forming words I couldn't hear. I tried to think. I was a ranger. I was trained for this, not for ice and witches and supernatural horror, but for survival, for staying calm in emergencies, for finding solutions when everything went wrong. The emergency flares. They burned hot enough to signal rescue planes, hot enough to start fires in wet conditions, maybe hot enough to fight whatever this was. I crawled across the floor to the supply cabinet, keeping low like the cold was a physical thing I could duck under. My fingers were so numb I could barely work the latch, but I finally got it open and pulled out the flare gun and 6 flares. The moment I touched the first flare, the humming stopped. Complete silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then something hit the door. Hard. The metal buckled inward, and I heard a sound like cracking ice mixed with a woman's scream. I loaded the flare gun with shaking hands and pointed it at the door. Another hit. The bolt lock bent. The door frame started to split. "Stay back," I shouted. "I'm warning you." A third hit, and the door burst open. The thing that came through wasn't human. It had the shape of a woman, tall, thin, with long arms and longer fingers. But its skin was blue-white, covered in ice crystals. Its eyes were solid white, no pupils, no iris. And its mouth was open in a silent scream that showed teeth made of ice. I fired the flare. The burning red light hit the creature square in the chest. It shrieked, a sound like wind through a canyon mixed with breaking glass, and stumbled backward. Steam rose from where the flare had struck, and I could see blackened flesh underneath the ice. It could be hurt. It could feel pain. That meant maybe I could survive this. The creature retreated down the stairs, still screaming, but I could see 2 more at the bottom of the tower, starting to climb up. I slammed what was left of the door shut and shoved the desk against it. Think, Maggie. Think. Fire. They hated fire. Heat drove them back. But I didn't have much. Just 6 flares total, and I'd already used 1. The windows. They were coming in through the door, but what about the windows? I ran to check them and saw my worst fear confirmed. Two more of those things were climbing up the outside of the tower, their frozen fingers finding holds in the metal struts like they were made for climbing. I was surrounded. I loaded another flare and waited. The desk scraped across the floor as something pushed against the door. The windows shuddered in their frames as those things climbed closer. The radio suddenly burst to life, not static this time. Clear voices, still in that strange language, but now I could understand them. Not the words themselves, but the meaning behind them. They were chanting, calling the cold, binding me here. They needed something from me, my warmth, my life, something I didn't fully understand. But I knew that if they finished their ritual, I would die here. I would freeze solid and my body would stay frozen forever. Another source of power for whatever dark magic they were working. Not happening, I growled. I didn't survive 15 years on this mountain to get killed by some winter witches. I fired a flare through the window at one of the climbing figures. It hit, and the thing fell, screaming, leaving a trail of steam as it tumbled down into the snow. But there were still more. Always more. The door burst open, the desk flying aside like it weighed nothing. 3 of them crowded into the doorway, moving slow but steady, their white eyes fixed on me. The temperature dropped even further. My eyelashes were freezing. My breath came out as ice crystals that fell to the floor and shattered. I fired twice more, and 2 of them fell back. But my hands were so cold I dropped the flare gun. It clattered across the frozen floor, sliding under the overturned desk. The last creature stepped into the tower. Up close, I could see it more clearly. It had been a woman once. I could see traces of humanity in the shape of its face, the curve of its shoulders. But the cold had taken everything else. It had frozen her from the inside out, turned her into something else, something that lived on cold and death. It reached for me with those long, frozen fingers. I grabbed the fire axe and swung. The axe hit the creature's arm and stuck there, frozen into the ice. The thing didn't even flinch. It just kept coming, pulling the axe out of my hands like I was a child. I backed up until I hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. The creature loomed over me, and I could feel the cold radiating from it like standing in front of an open freezer. My skin burned where the cold touched it. Its mouth opened wider, and frost poured out. Not breath. Frost. Like it was breathing winter itself. I thought about my 15 years on this mountain. All the storms I'd weathered, all the fires I'd fought, all the lost hikers I'd guided to safety. I thought about how I'd fought to be taken seriously as the first woman ranger in the district. I thought about how I'd told myself I wasn't afraid of anything these mountains could throw at me. I'd been wrong about that, but I wasn't going to die without a fight. My hand touched something in my coat pocket. The lighter. The cheap plastic lighter I used to light the kerosene heater. I pulled it out with fingers so numb I could barely feel them. The creature's frozen hand touched my face, and pain shot through me like I'd been stabbed. I could feel my skin crystallizing, ice spreading from where it touched me. I flicked the lighter. Once. Twice. On the 3rd try, it caught. I shoved the tiny flame right into the creature's face. It jerked back, shrieking. The ice where the flame touched turned black and started to melt. I saw flesh underneath, gray, dead flesh, but flesh that could burn. Everything could burn. I dropped the lighter and dove for the kerosene canisters. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just grabbed one and swung it as hard as I could at the creature. The metal can hit its chest and burst open, splashing kerosene everywhere. Then I grabbed one of the loose flares from the faucet, or struck it against the side and threw it. The tower exploded into flame. The kerosene ignited with a whoosh that knocked me backward. The creature caught fire like dry wood, screaming that horrible glass-breaking scream. The other creatures on the stairs fled, scrambling away from the heat. The ice on the walls started to melt, water running down in streams. But the tower was burning now. Actually burning. The wooden floor, the wooden supports, everything that wasn't metal. I'd saved myself from freezing to death by setting my only shelter on fire. Through the flames, I could see more of them outside. Dozens of them forming a circle around the tower. They were all chanting now, their voices rising in that strange language, and I finally understood what they were doing. It was a ritual, a winter solstice ritual. They needed life force, human life force, to power their magic, to control the storms, to make winter stronger, colder, more deadly. They'd been doing this for centuries, the old stories said. Taking people who came too high on the mountain during winter storms, freezing them, using them. I was supposed to be the next one. Well, fuck that, I said. The tower was fully engulfed now. I could feel the heat on my face, almost as painful as the cold had been. Black smoke filled the room, choking me. I had maybe a minute before the whole structure came down. I grabbed my emergency rope from the supply cabinet and tied one end to the metal railing. It was too hot to touch. I had to wrap my already frozen hands in what was left of a blanket to do it. Then I kicked out a window and threw the rope out. The creatures below scattered from the falling glass. They couldn't handle heat. Fire was their enemy. I climbed out onto the window ledge. 50 feet below me, I could see them gathering again, looking up at me with those white eyes. The snow around the tower was melted, from the heat of the fire, revealing symbols carved into the rock. Binding symbols, power symbols. This wasn't just a random attack. They'd been planning this, maybe for years, waiting for the right storm, the right time. The tower gave a groan of tortured metal. It was coming down. I grabbed the rope and jumped. The descent was more of a controlled fall. My frozen hands could barely grip the rope. I slid down fast, the rough hemp burning through my gloves, my palms. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I hit the ground hard and rolled. The creatures were coming toward me from all sides. I could feel the cold returning, their magic reaching out. I pulled my last flare from my pocket. I'd somehow managed to hang onto it and lit it. The bright red flame made them hesitate. I waved it at them, creating a circle of heat around me. "Come on!" I screamed at them. "Come on!" Above me, the tower collapsed. Metal screamed as it twisted and fell. Burning wood crashed down, sending up a shower of sparks. A piece of metal railing fell right where I'd been standing 2 seconds ago. The creatures retreated from the fire and heat. They moved back into the darkness of the storm, their white eyes glowing for a moment before they disappeared. The chanting stopped. I stood there in the melting snow, holding that flare, watching the tower burn. My hands were black with frostbite. My face felt like raw meat. I couldn't feel my toes. But I was alive. I stumbled away from the burning wreckage down the mountain road. I didn't know how far I'd have to walk. Miles, probably. But I had to get down. Had to get off this mountain while I still could. Behind me, I heard them in the storm. Waiting. Watching. The chanting started again, quieter now, fading into the distance. They'd lost this time, but they were still here, still alive, still cold. They found me 6 hours later halfway down the mountain, a search team coming up after the storm finally broke. By then, I couldn't walk anymore, couldn't talk, could barely breathe. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, lost 4 toes to frostbite, lost 3 fingers on my left hand. The doctor said I was lucky. Another hour, and I would have lost my whole feet. I told them the heater malfunctioned. Told them I'd knocked over the kerosene canisters trying to fix it, started the fire by accident. They believed me because what else could they believe? That mountain witches tried to freeze me to death? That I'd fought off ice creatures with flares and fire? The official report said accidental fire due to faulty heating equipment. The tower wasn't rebuilt. They said it was too dangerous, too expensive to maintain. I think they just wanted to forget what happened. I requested a transfer. They put me down in the lower elevations where winter means 40 degrees and a little rain. I told them I needed a change of scenery after 15 years in the high country. That was a lie. The truth is, I can't handle the cold anymore. Can't even handle air conditioning without feeling like those things are coming for me again. I sleep with 3 blankets, even in summer. I keep a lighter in every pocket, every room, just in case. Sometimes, on the news, I see reports about unusual winter storms in the mountains. Ice storms that come out of nowhere and hit harder than they should. I watch those reports and I wonder if they found someone else. if some other hiker or ranger got caught up there during a storm and never came back down. The old-timers still talk about mountain witches. They say the women who practice the old magic live in the highest peaks, where nobody goes in winter. They say those women made deals with winter itself, traded their humanity for power over ice and snow and cold. They say if you go up there during a storm, they'll take you, freeze you, use your life to make winter stronger. I used to think that was just superstition, just stories people told because they didn't understand how nature works. I do, and think that anymore. 3 months after the incident, I drove back up to White Top Mountain. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself that I could. Maybe to see if any of it was real. The tower site was empty. Just a foundation and some twisted metal. The Forest Service had cleaned up most of the debris. But when I looked at the rock where the symbols had been carved, I could still see them. Faint, almost invisible, but there. Binding symbols, power symbols. Old magic that didn't care about science or logic or geology degrees. I stood there in the summer heat, sweating in the sun, and I felt cold. Bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Something moved in the trees above me, just for a second. Something tall and pale. I didn't stay to see what it was. I got in my truck and drove down the mountain as fast as the road would let me. I haven't been back since. That was 4 years ago now. I'm doing fine, mostly. I work a desk job these days, planning fire prevention strategies, training new rangers. I'm good at it. I tell myself I'm happy, but I never go up into the high country anymore, never go anywhere in winter. And when I train new rangers, I always tell them the same thing. If you're up on a mountain and a storm comes in worse than forecast, you get down. You don't wait it out. You don't try to be tough. You get down to where it's safe. They nod and smile like they're listening, but I can tell they don't really understand. They think they know these mountains. They think they're prepared for anything nature can throw at them. I thought that too once. But there are things in these mountains that aren't natural. Things that were here before us and will be here long after. Things that wake up during the worst storms and look for people who've climbed too high, stayed too long. And if you ever see strange lights during a blizzard, or hear voices that aren't quite human, or find ice forming in patterns that shouldn't be possible, don't investigate. Don't try to explain it. Just run. Because mountain witches were never just superstit. Ion. And winter on the high peaks isn't always natural. Sometimes it's hungry. And I was almost its next meal. My name is Rebecca Stormwind, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a ranger at Cherokee National Forest for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal campers, you name it. But I was wrong. It was late May of 1984 when everything changed. The spring rains had been coming down hard for weeks, turning the hiking trails into muddy rivers and filling the valleys with thick white mist. Most visitors stayed away during weather like this, which was fine by me. It gave me time to focus on what I really cared about, protecting the ancient Cherokee sites scattered throughout these mountains. Before I became a ranger, I studied archaeology in college. That's what brought me here in the first place, the chance to guard these sacred places from vandals and treasure hunters. My ex-husband never understood why I cared so much about old rocks, as he called them. That's probably why he's my ex-husband now. On this particular morning, I got a call from park headquarters. Someone had reported damage at one of our protected sites, a stone circle deep in the Unicoi Mountains. My heart sank. That circle was over 300 years old, maybe more. The Cherokee used it for ceremonies before the government forced them out in 1838. It was my job to keep it safe. I loaded up my truck with my camera, evidence bags, and a thermos of coffee. The drive took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads, and then I had to hike another 2 miles through wet forest to reach the site. The trees dripped with rain, and fog hung so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. When I finally reached the stone circle, I stopped cold. Someone had moved the stones. Now, these weren't little rocks. Each one weighed at least 200 pounds, and they'd been sitting in the same spots for centuries. But 3 of them had been pushed over and a knot. Her had been dragged several feet from its original position. Deep gouges in the earth showed where it had been pulled. I took out my camera and started photographing everything, like I'd been trained to do. But when I pressed the button, nothing happened. The battery was dead. That was weird. I'd charged it the night before. I pulled out my backup battery from my pack, also dead. Great, I muttered, digging out my old manual camera instead. As I worked, I noticed something else strange. The forest was completely silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects. Just the drip, drip, drip of water from the leaves. I walked around the circle, looking for footprints or tire tracks, anything that might tell me who'd done this. The ground was soft from all the rain, so there should have been prints everywhere. But I only found one set, and they were odd. They came from the east, walked right up to the stones, and then stopped. Just ended at the edge of the circle, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I bent down to examine them closer. They weren't boot prints like I expected. They looked more like moccasins, soft leather shoes with no heel. And they were old, really old. The rain should have washed them away by now. A cold wind suddenly blew through the clearing, making me shiver. The mist swirled around the fallen stones, and for just a second I thought I heard something, a low humming sound like someone singing with their mouth closed. It seemed to come from the stones themselves. I stood up quickly, my heart beating faster. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just that awful silence. I told myself I was being stupid. The wind was playing tricks on me. The humming was probably just air moving through cracks in the rocks. There was a logical explanation for everything. But as I packed up my gear to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. And when I looked back one last time before heading down the trail, I could have sworn the stones had moved again, just an inch or two. But that was impossible. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those strange footprints that went nowhere. I kept thinking about the humming sound and the way the forest had gone silent. By morning, I'd convinced myself that I was overreacting. Someone had vandalized the site, probably local kids with a truck and some ropes. The footprints were just odd. The humming was wind. End of story. But I had to investigate properly. That was my job. I drove back to headquarters and pulled out the old file on the stone circle. It was thick, full of reports and surveys going back to the 1930s. Most of it was boring technical stuff about rock composition and archaeological dating. But near the bottom, I found something interesting. A newspaper clipping from 1952. The headline read, "Local man claims stones sing at midnight." According to the article, a hiker named Thomas Brennan had camped near the circle one night and heard what he described as Cherokee chanting and singing coming from the stones. When he investigated, he found no one there. The newspaper treated it like a joke, but Brennan swore it was real. He said the stones themselves were singing. I put the clipping aside and found a note paper-clipped to it. The handwriting was old and shaky. Brennan was right. I heard them too. J.M., 1963. A shiver ran down my back. I needed to talk to someone who actually knew Cherokee history, not just the archaeology part. So I called Dr. Joseph Feathercloud, a Cherokee historian who sometimes consulted with the Park Service. He was in his 70s and knew more about the old ways than anyone I'd ever met. "Becca," he said when he answered the phone. His voice was warm but serious. "What can I do for you?" I told him about the vandalism and the moved stones. I didn't mention the humming or the footprints. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. There was a long pause on the other end. "Which stone circle?" he finally asked. "The one in the Unicoi Mountains, near Bald River Falls." Another pause, longer this time. "That's not just any ceremonial site, Becca. That's where the Stone Singers held council." Stone Singers. The elders who guided our people before the removal. They say those men were so wise and powerful that even after they died, their spirits stayed to protect the sacred places. The stones in that circle, they were chosen because they sing when the spirits are present. The sound helped them communicate between the living world and the spirit world. My hands went cold. That's just a legend, right? Is it? Dr. Feathercloud's voice was quiet. Has anything unusual happened there? I thought about lying. Instead, I told him everything. The humming, the dead batteries, the footprints, the silence. He was quiet for a long time. Becca, I want you to listen to me carefully. If the stones are singing again, it means the spirits are angry. Something has disturbed them deeply. You need to be very, very careful. I'm a scientist, Dr. Feathercloud. I don't believe in them. Belief doesn't matter, he interrupted. Respect does. Those spirits protected our people for generations. They're still protecting those places even now, even from people who don't believe in them. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything as superstition. But another part, the part that had heard those stones humming, wasn't so sure. I decided to go back to the site one more time. During the day, when everything seemed less creepy, I'd take proper measurements, collect some soil samples, and file my report. Then I could forget about the whole thing. It was late afternoon when I reached the circle again. The rain had stopped, but the mist was even thicker than before. It clung to everything, like wet cotton. I set up my equipment and got to work. As I measured the distance the heavy stone had been dragged, I heard it again. That low humming sound. But this time it was louder, more like a melody. Like several voices singing together in harmony. I dropped my tape measure and spun around. Who's there? The humming stopped. I waited, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The mist swirled around me, and then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. There were people standing among the stones. At least, I thought they were people. They wore old-style Cherokee clothing, leather and woven cloth decorated with beads. But I could see through them. They were transparent, like smoke or fog shaped into human forms. There were 7 of them, all elderly men standing in a circle with their heads bowed. Their mouths moved like they were chanting, but I couldn't hear any words, just that humming sound, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then one of them raised his head and looked directly at me. His eyes glowed with a pale blue light. The spell broke. I grabbed my gear and ran, crashing through the underbrush like a terrified deer. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, and even then my hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. Through the trees, I could see the stone circle, and I could see those 7 figures still standing there, watching me go. I called in sick the next 2 days. I couldn't face that place again. I couldn't face the fact that everything I thought I knew about the world was wrong. But on the 3rd day, my supervisor called. Becca, we need you to check on that vandalism site again. Local police want to file charges, but we need more documentation. Can't someone else do it? My voice sounded weak, even to me. You're the cultural resource specialist. It's your job. So I went back. But this time, I wasn't going alone. I convinced Jake Martin, as another ranger, to come with me. Jake was big, practical, and afraid of nothing. If I was going crazy, at least I'd have a witness. We hiked up to the circle in the late morning. The weather had finally cleared and sunlight streamed through the trees. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. Birds were singing again. Squirrels chattered overhead. The awful silence was gone. So, what's the big mystery? Jake asked as we entered the clearing. Looks like standard vandalism to me. I opened my mouth to explain, then stopped. The stones were back in place. All of them. Standing upright, exactly where they'd been before. The deep gouges in the earth were gone. Even the strange footprints had vanished. I don't understand, I whispered. They were knocked over. I have photographs. But when I looked at my film camera, the back was open. All my film had been exposed to light. Ruined. Jake gave me a concerned look. Becca, are you feeling okay? Maybe you've been working too hard. No, I saw them. The stones were moved. I documented everything. Well, they're not moved now. Jake walked around the circle, examining each stone, and I don't see any damage. Are you sure you have the right location? Of course I'm sure. My voice came out sharper than I meant it. I've been coming here for 8 years. Jake held up his hands. Okay, I believe you. Maybe someone came back and fixed them. Those stones weigh 200 pounds each. Who could move them back without leaving any trace? Jake didn't have an answer for that. We spent another hour searching the area, but there was nothing to find. No evidence of vandalism. No evidence of anything unusual at all. Jake finally suggested we head back, and I reluctantly agreed. But as we were packing up, I heard it again. That humming sound. Faint, but unmistakable. Do you hear that? I asked Jake. He cocked his head. Seb, hear what? That humming, like singing. Jake listened for a moment, then shook his head. I don't hear anything. Just wind in the trees. The humming grew louder. I could almost make out words now, in a language I didn't understand. You really don't hear it? Becca, there's nothing there. Jake's voice was gentle, the way you'd talk to someone who was losing it. Come on, let's get you back. I wanted to argue, but what was the point? Either I was going crazy, or something impossible was happening. Neither option was good. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake by bringing Jake to the circle. Like I'd invited him into something dangerous without meaning to. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was the emergency line. Becca, it's Sarah from dispatch. We just got a call from Jake's wife. He never came home tonight. His truck's parked at the trailhead near Bald River Falls, but there's no sign of him. My stomach dropped. When did she last hear from him? Around 5 o'clock. He said he was going to check something out. Something about the stone circle. I was dressed and in my truck 10 minutes later. The trailhead was crowded with emergency vehicles when I arrived. Search and rescue teams were gearing up, preparing to sweep the area at first light. Jake's supervisor, Tom Henderson, pulled me aside. What the hell were you two investigating up there? He demanded. I told him about the vandalism report, but I left out everything else. The humming, the spirits, the stones that moved themselves. It sounded too crazy. Jake's an experienced ranger, Tom said. He doesn't just disappear. Did he seem okay when you left him? He seemed fine. We hiked back together. He was in his truck when I left. But that was a lie. Jake had walked me to my truck, then said he wanted to take one more look at the circle before heading home. I'd told him not to bother, that there was nothing to find. But he'd insisted, and I'd let him go. Alone. I joined the search at dawn. 20 of us spread out through the forest, calling Jack, his name. By noon, we still hadn't found anything. No tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing. But I knew where he'd be. I broke away from my search group and headed for the stone circle by myself. I didn't want anyone else getting hurt because of my mistake. The clearing was empty when I arrived. The stones stood silent in the afternoon sun. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. Jake, I called out. Jake, are you here? No answer. I walked into the center of the circle and closed my eyes. I know you're here, I said to the air. The stone singers, the spirits. I know you're real. Please, if you took Jake, give him back. He didn't mean any harm. He was just doing his job. The humming started immediately, louder than before, coming from all around me. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in white clouds. I opened my eyes. The 7 figures stood around me in a circle, their transparent forms more solid now, more real. I could see the details of their faces, the wrinkles, the scars, the wisdom in their eyes, and the anger. One of them stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from inside my head. You brought the unbeliever to our sacred place. I fell to my knees. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Please, where is he? The spirit raised his arm and pointed to the largest stone in the circle. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the stone seemed to shimmer, like heat waves on pavement, and I saw him. Jake was inside the stone. Not behind it. Inside it. I could see his face pressed against the rock from within, his mouth open in a silent scream. His hands pushed against the stone surface from the inside, trying to break free. He was trapped. Alive, but trapped. I lunged toward him, but the spirits blocked my way. Their transparent forms suddenly felt solid as iron. Let him go! I screamed. Please. The unbeliever, Desikra. Ted, our gathering place, the spirit said. He returns when the stones are made whole again. What does that mean? The stones are whole. They're right where they're supposed to be. The spirit's eyes blazed brighter. You do not understand. You do not see. The desecration runs deeper than moved stones. Then they were gone. All of them. The temperature returned to normal. The humming stopped. And Jake was still trapped inside the stone, his face frozen in terror. I ran back to the search teams and told them I'd found Jake, but when we all returned to the circle, he wasn't there anymore. The stone was just a stone, solid, ancient, and empty. Everyone looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew that Jake was running out of time. That night I called Dr. Feathercloud again. I told him everything, the spirits, the voices, Jake trapped in the stone. I expected him to think I was crazy, but he just listened quietly. The stone singers are showing you something, he said when I finished. They said the desecration runs deeper than moved stones. What do you think they meant? I don't know. I've protected that site for 8 years. I've kept it safe from vandals and looters. I've done everything right. Have you? Dr. Feathercloud's voice was gentle but firm. Becca, do you know the history of that circle? The real history? It was a ceremonial site. The Cherokee used it for important gatherings. It was more than that. It was where the elders made the hardest decision in our people's history. When the government ordered the Cherokee removal in 1838, the stone singers gathered at that circle to decide whether to resist or go peacefully. They knew that resistance meant death for many. Surrender meant leaving everything behind. I'd read about the Trail of Tears in school, but hearing it described this way made it feel real, immediate. In the end, Dr. Feathercloud continued, they chose to protect the people. They agreed to leave, to walk that terrible trail west. But before they went, they performed one final ceremony. They pools, read their spirits into those stones so that someday when their descendants returned, the stones would remember, would teach, would protect the sacred knowledge from being lost forever. So the spirits aren't angry about the vandalism? The vandalism is just a symptom of something larger. Think, Becca, what happened to that site over the years? What has been lost? Then it hit me. The Forest Service owns the land now. We control access to it. We study it, document it, protect it from damage. But we never let Cherokee people use it. We made it a historical site instead of a living sacred place. Yes, Dr. Feathercloud said softly. You've preserved the stones perfectly, but you've killed their purpose. The stone singers are trapped, unable to pass on their knowledge because no one comes to learn from them anymore. That's the real desecration. I felt sick. So what do I do? How do I fix this? You already know. The spirits told you, make the stones whole again. Give them back their purpose. The next morning I went straight to my supervisor and proposed something radical. Open the stone circle to Cherokee people for ceremonial use. Bring in elders to teach young people the old songs and stories. Let it be a living, sacred place again, not just a protected archaeological site. Tom thought I was insane, but I wouldn't back down. I showed him the research, explained the cultural significance, argued that the Park Service's mission was to preserve cultural heritage, and you couldn't preserve culture by locking it away. It took 3 days of meetings and phone calls, but finally the park superintendent agreed to a trial program. Dr. Feathercloud helped me contact Cherokee community leaders. They were skeptical at first. They'd been shut out of these places for so long. But when I explained what was happening, they agreed to help. On the night of the next full moon, 20 Cherokee people gathered at the stone circle. Dr. Feathercloud led them. They brought drums, rattles, and sacred tobacco. They sang the old songs that hadn't been heard in that place for over a century. I stood outside the circle, watching. The spirits appeared almost immediately, but this time they weren't angry. They stood among the living people, transparent but present, joining in the songs. As the ceremony continued, I saw the stone that had trapped Jake begin to glow with soft blue light. The light grew brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. When I looked again, Jake was lying on the ground at the base of the stone, gasping for breath. He was alive. The ceremony went on for hours. When it finally ended, the spirits gathered in the center of the circle one last time. The leader, the one who had spoken to me, looked directly at me and nodded once. A gesture of respect, of forgiveness. Then they faded away, and this time, I knew they were at peace. Jake spent a week in the hospital. The doctors couldn't explain what happened to him. His body showed signs of extreme hypothermia and pressure, like he'd been buried alive, but there wasn't a scratch on him. He couldn't remember anything after entering the stone circle that second time, just darkness and cold and the sound of singing. He put in for a transfer to a different forest the day he got out. I didn't blame him. The Cherokee ceremony at the stone circle became a monthly event. At first, the Park Service was nervous about it, but something amazing happened. The vandalism stopped, not just at that site, but at Cherokee sites all across the forest. Word spread in the Cherokee community that the sacred places were open again, were respected again, and they made sure everyone knew to treat them with honor. I still protect those sites. That's still my job, but now I protect them the right way, not by keeping people out, but by helping the right people connect with them. Dr. Feathercloud and I became close friends. He taught me some of the Cherokee language and stories, not the sacred ones. The schools aren't for outsiders, but enough that I understand what I'm protecting now, why it matters. Sometimes when I visit the stone circle alone, I hear the humming again. But it's different now, not angry or threatening, more like a lullaby or a song of thanks. The stones are singing, but they're singing with joy instead of rage. Last month, something strange happened at another protected site, 40 miles north. A ranger reported hearing drums in the middle of the night, coming from an ancient Cherokee mound that hasn't been touched in decades. She saw lights moving among the trees, blue lights like the ones I saw. I drove up to investigate. I found footprints around the mound, just like the ones I'd found at the stone circle. Moccasin prints that appeared and disappeared with no trail leading to or from them. I stood there in the morning sun looking at those impossible footprints, and I smiled. The stone singers weren't the only spirits protecting these mountains, and they weren't going to stay quiet anymore. I pulled out my radio and called headquarters. "This is Ranger Stormwind. I'm going to need Dr. Feathercloud's phone number again, and tell the superintendent we're going to need to expand the cultural access program." As I waited for the response, I heard it, faint but unmistakable. The sound of drums echoing across the valley, coming from places that had been silent for over 100 years. The spirits were waking up, all of them. And this time, we were going to listen. My name is William Blackdamp, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a forest ranger for 16 years now, patrolling the abandoned mining districts of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Before that, I spent 12 years underground in the coal mines, until the day the ceiling came down and buried 3 of my friends alive. I got out. They didn't. That was 1951. I swore I'd never go back underground again. But here's the thing about old mines. They don't just disappear when you close them up. They sit there in the earth like old wounds that never quite heal. It's January 1967, dead of winter. The snow's been falling for 3 days straight, blocking the access roads and leaving me alone at the ranger station. My wife, Mary, wasn't happy about me staying out here during the storm, but someone needs to watch over this territory. Our 5 kids are probably warm at home right now, gathered around the fireplace, while I'm stuck in this drafty cabin with nothing but coffee and my radio for company. The call came in yesterday morning from old Mrs. Patterson, who lives down in the valley. She said she'd seen lights moving around inside the Blackwell mine shaft, the one that's been sealed and supposedly flooded since the disaster in 1952. 15 men died in that cave-in. The company claimed it was an accident, sealed up the entrance, and that was that. "Just your imagination, ma'am," I told her on the phone. "Those old mines play tricks on people's minds." But she insisted. Said she'd seen the lights 3 nights running, always around midnight. Heard sounds, too. Picks hitting stone. Men's voices echoing up from deep underground. I didn't believe in ghosts. 16 years of ranging taught me that most supernatural things have simple explanations. Lights in old mines, usually just swamp gas or kids with flashlights looking for trouble. Voices? Wind echoing through empty. A shaft sounds like anything you want it to. Back when I worked underground, the older miners used to talk about mine ghosts. Spirits of dead miners still working their shifts. But I knew better. Those were just hallucinations from breathing bad air, mixed with the guilt we all carried for the men who didn't make it out. Still, abandoned mines are dangerous. If someone's broken into the Blackwell shaft, they could get hurt or worse. The snow finally let up this morning, so I loaded my pack with basic gear, flashlight, gas detector, rope, first aid kit, and headed out. The hike takes 2 hours through knee-deep snow. The forest is completely silent except for my boots crunching through the powder. No birds, no wind, just that heavy, waiting quiet that settles over everything before something bad happens. I know this trail by heart. Past the old slag heaps where nothing grows. Past the creek that still runs orange with mine runoff. Past the rusted equipment left behind when the mining company went bankrupt. This whole area used to be beautiful, my grandfather said, before they tore it apart looking for coal. The Blackwell mine entrance sits at the base of a rocky hillside, hidden behind a thick growth of dead trees. The steel door they welded over the shaft is still in place, no signs of forced entry. But as I get closer, I notice something that makes my skin prickle. The snow around the entrance has melted. In January, in a snowstorm. There's a perfect circle of bare ground around the mine shaft, maybe 20 feet across. Steam rises from the exposed earth, visible in the cold air. I pull out my gas detector and switch it on. The needle swings wildly, then settles on a reading that makes no sense. The device shows high levels of methane and carbon monoxide, but also warmth. Heat rising from below. Impossible. The mine's been sealed for 15 years. Nothing down there could be generating heat. I walk the perimeter of the melted area. The steel door is solid, no gaps or breaks, but when I press my hand against it, the metal is warm to the touch. Not hot, just warm. Like something alive is breathing on the other side. That's when I hear it. Faint, but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a pickaxe hitting stone, coming from deep underground. I stand frozen, listening. The tapping continues, steady, rhythmic, the sound every miner knows by heart. Someone's working down there. But that's impossible. The mine's been flooded since the cave-in. The company pumped millions of gallons of water down those shafts to stabilize them. I radio back to the station, but all I get is static. The storm must have taken out the relay tower. Protocol says I should wait for backup, but the nearest ranger is 50 miles away, and the roads won't be clear for days. If someone's trapped down there, maybe a kid who found another entrance, they could die waiting for help. I examine the steel door more carefully. The welds are old but solid. No way in through here without cutting equipment. But mines are tricky things. They spread like tree roots underground, connecting to other shafts, other tunnels. The Blackwell disaster happened because the miners broke through into an old, unmapped section. Maybe there's another way in. I follow the ridge line, checking my old survey maps. Sure enough, about a quarter-mile east, there should be a ventilation shaft. When I find it, the grate has rusted through and fallen in. The opening is barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, but I can feel warm air rushing up from below. My flashlight beam disappears into darkness. The shaft drops straight down about 30 feet, then angles off into the mountain. I can see the remains of an old ladder bolted to the stone wall. Every instinct I have screams at me to walk away. I left the mines behind for a reason. The nightmares of being trapped underground took years to fade. But I hear that tapping again, echoing up through the shaft, and I think about someone's kid down there in the dark. I tie off my rope and start climbing down. The ladder holds, barely. Several rungs are missing, forcing me to stretch between gaps. My flashlight, clipped to my belt, swings wildly, throwing crazy shadows on the rock walls. The air gets warmer as I descend, heavy with the smell of coal dust and something else, something rotten and sweet. At the bottom of the shaft, a horizontal tunnel leads deeper into the mountain. The walls are rough-cut stone supported by old timber beams that creak and groan. My boots kick up clouds of coal dust that float in my flashlight beam like black snow. The tapping has stopped. Hello? My voice echoes down the tunnel. Anyone down here? Silence. Then, Bill? My blood turns to ice. That voice. I know that voice. Bill Blackdamp? That you? It's Tommy Marsh. I worked with Tommy for 7 years. He was 23 when the ceiling came down on him in 1951. I watched him die, crushed under 3 tons of rock. Tommy's dead, I say out loud, my voice shaking. You're not real. Laughter echoes through the tunnel. Multiple voices, all familiar. Eddie Kowalski, Frank Chen, Red Morrison, all of them dead. All of them buried in collapsed mines across this mountain. Come on deeper, Bill, Tommy's voice calls. We got something to show you. I should run. I should climb back up that shaft and seal this hole and never come back. But my legs carry me forward, deeper into the mine. The tunnel opens into a larger chamber, and what I see there makes my mind refuse to accept what my eyes are showing me. The chamber is full of mining equipment, fresh equipment. Picks and shovels lean against the walls. A lunch pail sits on a timber support, still warm. Railroad tracks run along the floor, and a coal cart sits nearby, half filled with freshly broken stone. Everything looks new. No rust, no decay. Like someone just walked away from their shift 5 minutes ago. My gas detector screams, the needle pins at maximum for carbon monoxide. I should be dead right now, breathing this air. But somehow I'm fine. In the coal dust on the floor, I see footprints, dozens of them, boot prints leading deeper into the mine, into the sealed sections where no one should be able to go. And then I see the first body. He's sitting against the wall, lunch pail in his lap, like he just sat down for a break. His work clothes are caked with coal dust. His face is turned away from me. Hey, I call out, you okay? The figure doesn't move. I step closer, reach out to touch his shoulder. He turns his head. Where his face should be, there's nothing but hollow darkness. Black empty sockets where eyes should be. A mouth open in a silent scream. His skin has the gray-white color of limestone. I stumble backward, my flashlight falling from my hand. It rolls across the floor, the beams spinning crazily. In the sweeping light, I see more of them. 10, 20, maybe more. Miners sitting, standing, working, all with those same hollow faces, all moving slowly, mechanically, going through the motions of their jobs. Mining, still mining, even though they're dead. One of them turns toward me. His work clothes mark him as a shift supervisor. Half his head is caved in, showing white bone underneath. You shouldn't be here, Bill, he says in a voice like wind through empty rooms. You left us. You got out. I didn't. I couldn't. The living don't belong in our mine. The temperature drops 20 degrees in an instant. My breath comes out in clouds. The miners start moving toward me, slow but deliberate. Tools scrape against stone. Boots shuffle through coal dust. I grab my flashlight and run. I sprint back through the tunnel, my flashlight beam jumping wildly across the walls. Behind me, I hear them coming. Not running. They don't need to run. They know every inch of these tunnels. They've had 15 years to learn every passage, every dead end, every shaft that leads nowhere. I reach the ventilation shaft and to start climbing. The ladder rungs are slippery under my hands, coated with something wet and cold. I'm 10 feet up when I hear them gather at the bottom, looking up at me with those hollow faces. You can't leave, Bill. Tommy's voice echoes up the shaft. Not until you hear what happened to us. I know what happened, I shout down. Cave in, accident. No accident, another voice says. Eddie Kowalski, I think. They knew. The company knew those supports were bad. They knew the old tunnels were unstable. They sent us in anyway because fixing it would cost too much. I keep climbing. My arms burn. My lungs scream for air. The rope I left hanging down is just above me. A hand grabs my ankle. I look down. One of the miners has climbed up behind me, moving faster than should be possible. His fingers are ice cold through my boot, strong as steel cables. "Listen," he says. And suddenly I'm not in the shaft anymore. I'm in the mine, but it's different. The timbers are new. The air is full of dust, and living men are working all around me. I can hear their conversations, smell their sweat, feel the heat of their bodies in the confined space. I'm watching a memory. The mine's memory. A young miner, can't be more than 19, is checking the support beams. He finds cracks in the timber, sees where the rock face is shifting. He runs to tell the shift supervisor, pointing at the danger signs. The supervisor looks at the damaged supports, then checks his pocket watch. "We got quotas to meet," he says. "We shore it up at the end of shift." "But sir, this whole section could come down." "I said end of shift. Now get back to work." The young miner returns to his station, fear clear on his face. An older worker pats his shoulder. "Company knows what they're doing, kid. Stop worrying." 3 hours later, the mountain groans. The damaged timber support snaps with a sound like a gun shell. Men scream. Rock falls. The lights go out. 15 men die in the darkness, slowly, over hours and days. Some crushed instantly. Others trapped in pockets of air, calling for rescue that never comes. The company seals the entrance rather than risk more lives trying to dig them out. Officially, it's ruled an unfortunate accident. The families get small settlements in exchange for signing papers that say they won't sue. The truth dies with the miners. Until now. I'm back in the ventilation shaft, gasping. The miner has let go of my ankle. Below me, all the dead men are staring up. "Now you know," Tommy says. "Now you have to tell." "Tell who?" "The company's bankrupt. The managers are dead or gone. There's no one left to blame." "Tell the families," Eddie says. "Tell them their dads and brothers and sons didn't die because they were careless. Tell them the truth." "I can't prove any of that." "Yes, you can." Red Morrison's voice now. "The company records are still down here. They hid them in the sealed section. All the safety complaints, all the warnings they ignored, all the evidence they buried. It's all here, Bill. In our mine." "Your mine?" The words slip out before I can stop them. The temperature drops again. The miners' forms start to solidify, becoming more substantial. I can see details now, the coal dust in their hair, the blood on their torn clothes, the terrible injuries that killed them. "Our mine," Tommy says, and his voice is no longer friendly. "We died here. We're still here. And this is our territory now. The living took everything from us. Our futures, our families, our justice. This mine is all we have left." One of the miners raises a pickaxe. The blade gleams in my flashlight beam. "So you have two choices, Bill. Go back down and help us bring out the evidence, or stay here with us, forever." I look up at the circle of gray daylight at the top of the shaft. So close. I could climb up, seal this entrance, and forget I ever came down here. Report it as another abandoned mine with bad air. Let the dead keep their secrets. But I'm all red. I'm climbing back down the ladder. Not because I believe in ghosts, even though I'm talking to them. Not because I care about justice for men who died before I even started ranging. But because of those families. Because of the kids who grew up thinking their fathers died due to their own carelessness. Because someone needs to know the truth. "Show me," I say. The miners lead me deeper into the mountain. The tunnel narrows until I have to crouch, then crawl on my hands and knees through passages that shouldn't exist. My flashlight reveals more impossible things. Sections of the mine that were supposed to be flooded are bone dry. Tunnels that should have collapsed years ago stand solid. And everywhere, signs of the miners' presence. Tools arranged in neat rows, lunch pails sitting at workstations, names carved into support beams. Tommy Marsh leads the way, his form flickering between solid and translucent. The company welded the entrance shut 2 days after the cave-in, he says. Didn't even wait for the rescue efforts to officially end. They knew some of us were still alive down here. How long did you survive? He stops walking. When he turns to face me, his hollow eyes seem to bore straight through to my soul. Frank Chen lasted 6 days. We could hear him calling for help from the other side of the cave-in. His voice got weaker each day. On the 6th day, he just stopped. Eddie made it 8 days. Red and I lasted the longest. 10 days in total darkness, drinking water that seeped through the rocks, knowing no one was coming. I swallow hard. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring us back, Bill, but the truth might give us peace. We reach a section of the mine I don't recognize from any map. The tunnel opens into a natural cavern where stalactites hang from the ceiling like teeth. At the far end sits a metal filing cabinet, impossibly dry and untouched by rust. The HIFT supervisor hid it here after the cave-in, Eddie's ghost says, materializing beside me. Thought he'd come back for it later, destroy the evidence. But he had a heart attack 2 months. Later, guilty conscience maybe. I open the cabinet. Inside are dozens of files. Safety inspection reports, maintenance logs, internal company memos. My hands shake as I read them. Page after page of documented hazards, ignored complaints, warnings written by miners who knew the supports were failing. One memo, dated 3 days before the disaster, is from the mine's chief engineer to the company president. The Blackwell Mine's eastern section is critically unstable. Recommend immediate evacuation and reinforcement. Estimated cost, $45,000. Estimated time, 3-4 weeks. The response, handwritten in the margin. Too expensive. Continue operations. We'll deal with problems as they arise. They killed us to save $45,000, Red says quietly. That's what our lives were worth. I'm stuffing files into my pack when the mine groans. Not the normal settling sounds. This is different. Deeper. Angrier. What's happening? The mine doesn't want you to leave, Tommy says. And for the first time I hear fear in his ghostly voice. We've been feeding it for 15 years. Our rage, our grief, our need for justice. It's alive now, in a way, and it's hungry. The cavern shakes. Rocks fall from the ceiling, splashing into pools of water that weren't there a moment ago. The temperature spikes, going from freezing to sweltering in seconds. You have to run, Eddie shouts. Now! Before it traps you here like it trapped us! But the passage we came through is already collapsing. Tons of rock crash down, sealing the exit. I spin around, looking for another way out. The ghosts flicker and fade, losing their form as the mine's energy builds. There's an old emergency shaft. Red points to a narrow crack in the cavern wall. It leads to the surface, but you have to go now. I run for the opening as the entire mine comes alive around me. The walls pulse like a heartbeat. Water floods in from hidden cracks, rising fast. The ghosts of the miners swirl around me, no longer human-shaped, but just energy, rage and pain given form. The emergency shaft is barely wide enough for my shoulders. I wedge myself into the crack and start climbing, using my back against one wall and my feet against the other. The pack full of evidence weighs me down, threatening to pull me back into the flooded cavern below. Behind me, something that isn't quite the miners anymore screams in fury. The mine doesn't want me to escape. It doesn't want the truth to leave these tunnels. My muscles burn. My shoulders scrape against rough stone, leaving skin and blood behind. But I keep climbing. 20 feet. 30. 40. The shaft gets narrower, tighter. I'm stuck. No, not stuck. Not after coming this far. I exhale completely, making my chest as small as possible, and force myself upward another foot, then another. My pack catches on a rocky projection. I twist free, hearing papers scatter as the pack tears open. Above me, I see light. Real light. Not my flashlight. Daylight. With one final desperate effort, I pull myself up through the opening and collapse onto snow-covered ground. Cold air fills my lungs. I can hear birds, actual birds, singing in the trees. I'm out. Behind me, the emergency shaft explodes outward. Rock and coal dust erupt like a geyser, then the whole thing collapses in on itself. The ground shakes for a full minute before going still. When I finally catch my breath and check my pack, I'm terrified I'll find it empty. But the most important files are still there. The safety reports, the ignored warnings, the memo that proves the company knew. I have the evidence. I have the truth. Now I just have to survive the hike back to civilization. It took me 6 hours to reach the ranger station, moving through waist-deep snow with a torn pack and bloodied shoulder. By the time I radioed for help, I was hypothermic and barely conscious. The doctors at the hospital asked about my injuries. I told them I fell while investigating an old mine shaft. Close enough to the truth, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen down there. The ghosts, the living mine, the truth about 15 men who died for nothing. 3 days after I got out, I contacted the families of the miners who died in the Blackwell disaster. 15 years had passed, but the pain was still fresh. Most of them thought I was crazy when I first called. But when I showed them the documents, the safety reports, the warnings, the memo that proved their loved ones' deaths were preventable, everything changed. Mrs. Marsh, Tommy's mother, sat in her kitchen reading the files with tears streaming down her face. They told us Tommy was careless, she said, that he didn't follow safety protocols. For 15 years, I believe my son died because he made mistakes. He died because the company valued profit over lives, I told her, and he deserves to have people know that. The families hired lawyers. The case made headlines across West Virginia. Even though the original mining company was bankrupt and its executives dead or scattered, the state agreed to an official inquiry. The truth came out. The Blackwell mine disaster was completely preventable. The company had gambled with miners' lives and lost. It didn't bring anyone back. But it gave the families something they'd needed for 15 years, the truth, and the knowledge that their loved ones hadn't died due to their own failures. A month later, the state permanently sealed all entrances to the Blackwell mine complex. They poured concrete down every shaft, welded steel plates over every opening, and declared the entire area off-limits. The official reason was structural instability. I know the real reason. The mine had become something else, something that fed on death and grief and wanted to keep collecting souls. On my last patrol before they sealed it, I stood at the welded entrance and spoke it into the cold steel. I kept my promise. The truth is out. People know what happened to you. I felt, rather than heard, a response. The warm breath of air from below seemed to carry words. Thank you. When I touched the steel door this time, it was cold. Normal cold. Whatever had been alive in those tunnels was finally at rest. But sometimes, late at night at the ranger station, I still think about the other abandoned mines scattered across these mountains. Hundreds of them, from decades of coal mining. Hundreds of disasters, hundreds of deaths, hundreds of stories that were buried along with the victims. And I wonder, how many of those mines are still waiting for someone to tell their truth? Last week, a call came in from a farmer whose land borders the old Richland mine, sealed in 1944 after a fire killed 23 men. He says he's been seeing lights moving underground, hearing voices echoing from the sealed shaft. I've been a ranger for 16 years now. I've investigated dozens of abandoned mines, always finding rational explanations. But after Blackwell, I know better. Some mines hold more than just coal and rock. Some hold the restless dead, waiting for justice, waiting for someone to remember them, waiting for their truth to finally come out. My name is William Blackdamp, and I'm starting to understand that my real job isn't just protecting the forest. It's giving voice to the dead who can't speak for themselves, and I have a feeling my work is just beginning. My name is Elizabeth Ravencrest, and I've been a park ranger at Grandfather Mountain for 12 years. I've tracked black bears through dense fog, pulled injured hikers off cliff faces, and once spent 3 days searching for a lost kid in a blizzard. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. My grandmother used to tell me stories about skinwalkers, spirits that could change their shape, becoming any animal they wanted. She said they guarded sacred places, punishing anyone who disturbed them. I'd nod and smile, but inside I thought it was just old Cherokee folklore, stories to scare kids around the campfire. That was before October 1986. It started on a Tuesday morning. The leaves were at peak color, brilliant reds and golds covering the mountains like fire. We had tourists everywhere, walking across the mile-high swinging bridge, taking photos, enjoying the views. It was our busiest time of year. I was in my office doing paperwork when Tom Chen, another ranger, knocked on my door. His face was pale. "Elizabeth, you need to see something," he said. We drove up to the Callaway Peak Trail. A group of hikers had found something near the overlook. As we walked the trail, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Just silence. The body was at the edge of the trail, partially hidden by rhododendron bushes. It was a young man, maybe 25 years old. His backpack was still on, but his throat had been torn out and deep claw marks ran down his chest. The strange thing was how the body was positioned, laid out almost carefully, like someone had arranged it. "Bear attack?" Tom asked, his voice shaky. I knelt down, studying the wounds. I'd seen bear attacks before. This wasn't right. The claw marks were too deep, too precise, and bears didn't arrange their kills like this. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't. To believe it, we called it in and waited for the state wildlife team. While we stood there, I noticed something else. About 10 feet from the body, there were tracks in the soft dirt. They started as human footprints, bare feet, adult-sized. But halfway across the clearing, they changed. The prints became bear tracks, huge ones, bigger than any black bear I'd ever seen. Then, another 20 feet away, the bear tracks changed again. They became human prints. "Tom, are you seeing this?" I whispered. He nodded, his eyes wide. "What kind of animal does that?" "None that I know of," I said. We took photos and measurements. By the time the wildlife team arrived that afternoon, I had a folder full of evidence that made no sense. The team leader, Dr. Sarah Hayes, was a woman I'd worked with before. She was smart, no nonsense, and didn't believe in anything she couldn't prove with science. She examined the body and frowned. "The wounds are consistent with a large predator, but the pattern is unusual. We'll need to do an autopsy." "What about the tracks?" I asked, showing her the photos. She studied them for a long time. "Could be two different animals, or someone walking through after the attack." "The tracks overlap," I pointed out. "They're from the same path, same time." Dr. Hayes didn't answer. She just packed up her equipment and left with the body. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tracks, about how the footprints changed into bear prints, then back to human, about my grandmother's stories. At 3 a.m, my radio crackled to life. "All units, we have another incident. Callaway Trail near the bridge. Multiple casualties." I was in my truck within 5 minutes. The scene at the bridge was chaos. Emergency lights flashed red and blue against the trees. 3 bodies this time, a family, mother, father, and teenage daughter. They'd been camping near the trail when something attacked their tent. The tent was shredded. Long claw marks ran through the fabric like someone had taken giant knives to it. But inside, the sleeping bags were untouched. Whatever killed these people had done it outside the tent, then dragged them back inside. "Why would an animal do that?" Tom asked. He'd arrived just after me. I didn't answer. I was looking at the tracks again. They circled the campsite in a wide loop, sometimes human, sometimes bear. Sometimes they looked like wolf prints, big ones, with claw marks that dug deep into the earth. And in one spot, near a tree, the tracks showed something impossible. They showed the exact moment something changed. Human toes lengthening into claws, feet stretching into paws, all captured in the soft mud like a photograph. "Elizabeth, you're scaring me," Tom said quietly. "What are we dealing with here?" Before I could answer, we heard screaming from up the trail. We ran toward the sound, flashlights cutting through the darkness. A man stumbled out of the trees, his face covered in blood. Behind him, something moved in the shadows, something big. "Get down!" I shouted, pulling my service weapon. The man dropped to the ground. I aimed my flashlight into the trees. For just a second I saw it. It looked like a bear, but wrong. Too tall. Its front legs were too long, almost like arms. And its face, God, its face looked almost human. Dark eyes that stared right at me with intelligence no animal should have. Then it turned and ran. Not on 4 legs like a bear should. On 2 legs, like a person. I fired twice, but it was already gone, disappearing into the rhododendron thickets like smoke. The injured man was a tourist named David Richards. Something had attacked him while he was walking back to his campsite. He kept saying the same thing over and over. It was a bear, but it walked like a man. It walked like a man. We evacuated everyone we could find and set up a command post at the visitor center. By dawn, we had 20 tourists, 6 rangers, and Dr. Hayes, who'd driven back to Mas P when she heard about the new attacks. That's when the rock slide happened. A whole section of the mountain road collapsed, taking out the only vehicle access route. We were cut off. Rescue teams would take at least 3 days to reach us by foot through the back trails. We were trapped on the mountain with whatever was killing people. Dr. Hayes pulled me aside. "I need to show you something," she said. We went into her makeshift lab, a corner of the visitor center where she'd set up her equipment. She had photos spread across a table, close-ups of the wounds from all the victims. "Look at this," she said, pointing to one image. These claw marks were made by something with 5 fingers. Bears have 5 toes, but the structure is completely different. These marks were made by something with hands. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this isn't a bear. I don't know what it is, but it's not any animal in our database." She paused. "There's something else. I found human DNA at the crime scenes, not from the victims, from whatever killed them." I felt cold. Human DNA? Mixed with animal DNA. Wolf, bear, mountain lion, it's all there, mixed together in a way that shouldn't be possible. She looked at me with frightened eyes. "Elizabeth, what's happening here?" I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the construction crew that had been working on the new trail extension, about how they dug up part of an old Cherokee burial site last month, moving bones and sacred objects to make room for their equipment. "I think we disturbed something we shouldn't have," I said quietly. That afternoon, we set up a perimeter around the visitor center. Everyone had to stay inside after dark. We posted guards with rifles and floodlights. It didn't matter. At sunset, the creature came. It started with the lights going out. One by one, the floodlights around the perimeter exploded. No, it flickered, exploded, like something had smashed them with rocks. We could hear glass shattering in the darkness. Then we heard the howling. It wasn't one animal. It sounded like a whole pack of wolves circling the building. But underneath the howling, I heard something else. Something that sounded almost like laughing. "Lock all the doors," I shouted. "Get away from the windows." Tom was at the north window with his rifle. "Elizabeth, you need to see this." I looked outside. In the moonlight, I could see shapes moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was multiple animals, bears, wolves, maybe mountain lions. But as I watched, I realized it was all one creature. It kept changing. One second it was a massive bear, the next a wolf, then something I'd never seen before, something with too many legs and too many teeth. "How is that possible?" Tom whispered. The creature, I couldn't think of it as an animal anymore, circled the building 3 times. Then it stopped at the front door and changed again. This time, it became a man. He was tall, with long dark hair and traditional Cherokee clothing. His face was painted with symbols I didn't recognize. But his eyes were wrong. They glowed in the darkness like an animal's eyes. He spoke in a language I didn't understand at first. Then I realized it was Cherokee. My grandmother had taught me a little when I was young. He was saying, "You took our bones. You disturbed our rest. Now you pay." "We need to give back what was taken," I said to Dr. Hayes. The construction crew. They moved burial remains. We need to find them and return them. That's crazy, she started. Look outside, I shouted. Look at what's happening. This isn't science, Sarah. This is something else. The creature slammed against the door. The whole building shook. People screamed. I grabbed my radio and called the construction office. No answer. The phone lines were dead too. We were completely cut off. The remains, Dr. Hayes said suddenly. They brought them to the archaeology trailer. It's about half a mile from here, near Tut, at the old construction site. Then that's where we need to go, I said. Tom shook his head. We can't go out there. That thing will kill us. It's going to kill us anyway if we stay here. At least this way we have a chance. I put together a team, me, Tom, Dr. Hayes, and 2 other rangers named Mike and Jennifer. We armed ourselves with rifles and flashlights. At exactly midnight, we opened the back door and ran for the trees. The creature was waiting for us. It came out of nowhere, changing from a wolf to a bear to something in between. Mike fired his rifle, but the bullets didn't seem to hurt it. The creature grabbed him, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Run! I screamed. We ran through the forest, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, I heard Mike screaming. Then the screaming stopped. Jennifer tripped on a root and went down hard. Before I could help her, the creature was there. It had changed again, becoming a huge mountain lion with human hands instead of paws. Jennifer didn't even have time to scream. Keep going, Tom yelled. The 3 of us who were left, me, Tom, and Dr. Hayes, made it to the archaeology trailer. We slammed the door and pushed a desk against it. The trailer was small, filled with boxes and equipment. In the corner, I saw what we'd come for. 3 wooden crates marked Archaeological Remains, Callaway Peak Site. Help me with these, I said, opening the first crate. Inside were bones, human bones, arranged carefully. There were also artifacts, pottery pieces, arrowheads, and something that looked like a ceremonial necklace made of bear claws. The trailer door exploded inward. The creature stood in the doorway, but it wasn't changing anymore. It had settled into one form, the Cherokee warrior I'd seen outside the visitor center. But now I could see him clearly. His skin was covered in scars. His eyes were filled with pain and rage. He pointed at the crates and spoke in Cherokee again. This time I understood more. My people, my family, you dug them up like garbage. I'm sorry, I said, surprised by my own words. We didn't know. We should have protected this place. We should have stopped them. The creature, no, the warrior, tilted his head, studying me. You have Cherokee blood, he said in English now. I can smell it. Why did you let them do this? I didn't know until it was too late, I said honestly. But I can fix it. I can return the remains. I can make sure they're buried properly, with respect. The warrior moved closer. In the dim light, I could see that he wasn't solid. I could see through him in places, like he was made of smoke and shadow. For 300 years, I guarded this mountain, he said. I died defending my people's burial ground from invaders. A medicine woman bound my spirit to this place, made me its protector. But I cannot rest until those I guard are at peace. Then help me return them, I said. Show me where they should be buried. He looked at the crates, then back at me. For a moment, the rage in his eyes faded, replaced by something that looked like grief. The sacred site, he said. Above the bridge, where the white eagles nest. That is where my family should rest. Behind him I heard shouts. The other rangers had followed us from the visitor center. They had guns pointed at the warrior. Don't shoot, I yelled. He's not going to hurt us. Elizabeth, get away from that thing, someone shouted back. But I didn't move. I looked into the warrior's eyes and saw not a monster, but a man who had been protecting his family for centuries. A man who was tired. I'll take them, I said. Tonight, right now. Just don't hurt anyone else. The warrior stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and stepped back. You have until dawn. If the bones are not returned by first light, everyone on this mountain dies. He changed then, becoming a massive bear, and ran into the forest. It took us an hour to carry the crates up to the sacred site. The path was steep and dangerous in the dark, but we made it. Dr. Hayes helped me dig new graves in the spot the warrior had indicated. We worked by flashlight, our hands blistering from the shovels. As we dug, Dr. Hayes asked, "Do you really think this will work?" "It has to," I said. We placed the bones carefully in the ground, along with all the artifacts. I tried to remember the Cherokee burial prayers my grandmother had taught me. The words came back slowly, phrases about journeys and ancestors and peace. As I spoke, the air around us changed. It felt warmer somehow, less oppressive. The terrible silence that had hung over the mountain for days began to lift. In the distance, I heard an owl calling. When we finished, the sun was just starting to rise. Pink light touched the mountain peaks. The warrior appeared one last time, but he looked different now. The rage was gone from his face. He looked younger, more at peace. "Thank you," he said quietly. My watch is ended. He knelt beside the graves we'd dug and placed his hand on the earth. Then he began to fade, becoming transparent, then just wisps of smoke that drifted away on the morning breeze. As he disappeared, I felt something shift. The mountain itself seemed to sigh with relief. Birds began singing in the trees. Somewhere nearby, a bear huffed and moved through the underbrush. Normal sounds, living sounds. It was over. The rescue teams reached us the next day. We had a lot of explaining to do. 5 people were dead. The official report said it was a rogue bear, later killed by rangers. Dr. Hayes and I agreed to keep the truth between us and the few rangers who'd witnessed what really happened. The construction project was permanently canceled. I made sure of that. I spent weeks researching the site, documenting its historical and cultural significance. I contacted Cherokee tribal leaders and worked with them to have the entire area designated as a protected cultural site. It's been 3 months now. I still patrol Grandfather Mountain every day, but I look at it differently now. I see the sacred places my grandmother told me about. I notice the old markers, the spots where the trees grow in strange patterns, the rocks arranged by human hands centuries ago. And I make sure everyone who visits knows this isn't just a park. It's a graveyard, a church, a place that demands respect. Sometimes, late at night, I think I see something moving on the peaks, a shadow that's too big to be a normal bear, a shape that walks like a man. But it's not threatening anymore. It's just watching, making sure we keep our promise. Dr. Hayes left the Park Service. She teaches now at a university, and she's written papers about the importance of protecting indigenous burial sites. She never mentions what we saw, but I know she thinks about it. We talk sometimes, usually late at night when neither of us can sleep. Tom requested a transfer to a different park. I don't blame him. What he saw changed him. It changed all of us. As for me, I requested to stay here permanently. Someone needs to make sure what happened to that warrior's family never happens again. Someone needs to guard the guardians. My grandmother passed away last winter. Before she died, I told her everything. She didn't seem surprised. "The old ones protect what is sacred," she said, holding my hand. "And sometimes, the sacred needs protecting from us." I think about that a lot now, about how we walk through these mountains like we own them, building and digging and changing things without thinking about what was here before, about how some boundaries exist for good reasons. Last week, I heard there's a new development planned for the east side of the mountain. They want to build a resort with hotels and ski lifts and restaurants. The company already has permits. They start construction next month. I've been having dreams. In them, I see the warrior standing on the mountain peak, watching the bulldozers come. In the dreams, he's not alone anymore. There are others with him, more guardians, waking up after centuries of sleep. I submitted my reports to the State Environmental Office. I contacted tribal leaders. I've done everything I can through official channels, but I don't think it's going to be enough. So tonight, I'm going back up to the sacred site. I'm going to leave tobacco, like my grandmother taught me. And I'm going to say a prayer, not for protection, but for forgiveness. Because when those bulldozers arrive next month and start digging into the mountain, I don't think any prayers will save the people driving them. Some things should stay buried. Some places should stay sacred. And some guardians never truly rest. They're just waiting,